Red Hollow, Wyoming, 1882. 6 men, 1 girl. A frozen alley where screams go unanswered. Clara Boone is about to learn what happens when you're nobody in a town that devours the weak. Tonight, in the bitter cold, her invisibility won't save her. It might just kill her. But when a stranger steps out of the darkness, everything she thought she knew about survival is about to shatter. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels. The wind cut through Red Hollow like a blade looking for bone. Clara Boone pressed herself against the brick wall of Morrison's general store, her breath coming out in ragged clouds that disappeared into the January darkness. Her fingers were numb inside her threadbare gloves she'd found in the alley behind the boarding house 3 winters ago, already worn through at the knuckles. The cold didn't care. It never did. She'd made a mistake tonight, a stupid, desperate mistake. The side door of Mackenzie's Saloon stood 15 feet away, warmth bleeding out into the alley in a golden rectangle of lamplight. She could hear glasses clinking, men laughing, the off-key piano that Frank Delaney played when he was 3 drinks deep. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Sounds from a world she'd never quite belonged to, even though she'd spent the last 4 years washing dishes in that very kitchen. Clara had left through that door 20 minutes ago with a bucket of scraps, potato peels, chicken bones, the kind of refuse Walter Mackenzie threw out every night. She wasn't stealing. She'd asked. Walter had shrugged, already counting the evening's receipts, and told her to take whatever was headed for the pigs anyway. But somewhere between the kitchen and her room above the laundry, she'd been seen. There she is. The voice came from her left, rough and pleased with itself. Clara's stomach dropped. She turned slowly, knowing what she'd find. 6 men stood at the mouth of the alley, blocking her path back to the main street. She recognized 4 of them. Tommy Barlow, the blacksmith's son, with his permanent sneer and hands that were always looking for something to hurt. Next to him, Pete Crenshaw and his brother Dale, both ranch hands for the Broken Creek outfit, men who treated women like livestock. The 4th was Virgil Hayes, a drifter who'd been hanging around Red Hollow for the past month, doing odd jobs and making people nervous. The other 2 she didn't know. Didn't matter. Their faces told her everything. Thought you could just walk off with Mr. Mackenzie's property, fat girl? Tommy took a step forward, his boots crunching on the frozen mud. Thought nobody'd notice. Clara's throat tightened. These are scraps. He said I could. He said. Pete Crenshaw spat into the snow. You hear that, boys? She's got permission now. Since when does the kitchen sew get to decide what's hers and what ain't? Laughter rippled through the group. Not the kind that came from joy. The kind that came from cruelty, looking for an excuse. Clara clutched the bucket tighter, her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat screaming at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The alley dead-ended 20 feet behind her at a warehouse wall. The only way out was through them. I'll put it back. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. I didn't mean any trouble. Too late for that. Virgil Hayes pulled a bottle from his coat, took a long drink, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. See, the problem is, girls like you think the rules don't apply. Think you can just take what you want because you got those sad eyes and that poor me story. I don't think that. Clara tried to keep her voice steady. I was hungry. Always hungry, ain't you? Dale Crenshaw grinned, showing brown teeth. Maybe if you stopped eating so much, you wouldn't be such a burden on decent folk. More laughter. Closer now. They were moving in, slow and deliberate, the way wolves circled something wounded. Clara's mind raced. She could scream, but who would come? The saloon was loud, and even if someone heard, would they care? She was the kitchen girl, the orphan who'd shown up 4 years ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and a dead mother's name. She'd survived this long by being quiet, by being useful, by making herself as small as possible despite her size. Small didn't work anymore. Look at her shaking. Tommy Barlow was close enough now that Clara could smell the whiskey on him. You scared, Clara. You should be. Leave me alone. The words came out sharper than she intended. I haven't done anything to you. You exist. Tommy's smile disappeared. That's enough. He reached for her, and Clara did the only thing she could think of. She swung the bucket. It caught him in the shoulder, scattering potato peels and chicken bones across the frozen ground. Tommy stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. And for one wild second, Clara thought maybe she'd bought herself enough time to run. Then his fist caught her across the face. The world tilted. Clara's cheek exploded in pain, bright and sharp, and she hit the ground hard, her palms scraping against ice and stone. The bucket clattered away. Blood filled her mouth. She'd bitten her tongue.
"You stupid bitch!" Tommy stood over her, shaking out his hand. "You actually hit me!" Clara tried to push herself up, but someone's boot caught her in the ribs. Air left her lungs in a painful rush. She curled instinctively, trying to protect herself, trying to remember how to breathe. "That's for the bucket," Pete Crenshaw's voice somewhere above her. "Now let's talk about restitution." "Restitution?" Dale laughed. "That's a big word for you, brother." "Shut up. I know words."
Clara's vision swam. She could taste copper and fear. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard them talking, discussing what to do with her like she was a problem to be solved, not a person bleeding on the ground. "Could take her to the sheriff," one of them said. "Theft's theft." "Sheriff won't care about scraps." That was Virgil. "Besides, this is more fun. Maybe we should teach her a lesson she won't forget." "What kind of lesson?" "The kind that reminds her what happens when you step out of line." Clara's hands found the wall, and she dragged herself upright, leaning against the brick because her legs wouldn't quite hold her. Her face throbbed, her ribs screamed. But she met their eyes anyway, because if this was how it ended, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. "Go ahead." The words came out broken, but clear. "Do whatever you're going to do. You will anyway." Tommy's expression flickered, something that might have been respect, quickly buried under anger. "You got a mouth on you. Let's see if—" "That's enough." The voice came from behind the men, quiet but absolute. Everyone froze. Clara blinked through the pain, trying to focus. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley, backlit by the street lamp on Main, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from control. "This ain't your business, stranger." Tommy didn't turn around, but his voice had changed, less certain. "Keep walking." "Can't do that." The figure stepped forward into the alley's shadows, and Clara's breath caught. He was older than her, maybe 35, maybe 40, hard to tell with men who lived rough. His coat was heavy canvas, patched in places but well-maintained. His hat was pulled low, but she could see a dark beard, weathered skin, eyes that took in everything and judged nothing. Or maybe judged everything and showed nothing. Hard to tell. "You deaf?" Pete Crenshaw turned now, squaring up. "We said move along." "Heard you fine." The stranger's gaze shifted to Clara, still pressed against the wall, blood on her chin. Something tightened in his jaw. "Saw what you did, too." "Yeah? And what are you going to do about it?" Dale Crenshaw's hand moved toward his belt, where a knife handle jutted out. "There's 6 of us and 1 of you. Math ain't exactly in your favor." The stranger didn't reach for a weapon, didn't even shift his weight. He just looked at Dale until the younger man's hand stopped moving. "Math." The stranger's voice was flat, almost bored. "You think numbers make you brave?" "I think they make us right." Tommy found his courage again, puffing up. "This is town business. You're not from here. You don't know what this girl did." "I know what you're doing." "And what's that?" "Being the kind of men who jump a woman in an alley because you can." The stranger tilted his head slightly. "The kind who need 6 bodies to feel strong. The kind who tell themselves they're teaching lessons when really they're just scared." Silence dropped like a stone. Virgil Hayes laughed nervously. "Scared? Of what? Her? Of being alone?" The stranger's eyes moved across each face, slow and deliberate. Of finding out what happens when you don't have a pack to hide in. Of realizing that without these 5, you're nothing but small men with smaller courage. "That's enough." Tommy's face flushed red. "You want to get hurt defending some fat kitchen girl who don't matter to nobody? That's your funeral. She matters." The stranger said it simply, like he was stating a fact. "And here's how this ends. You walk away now, go back to your drinks, forget this happened." Or what?" Pete Crenshaw pulled his knife, letting it catch the lamplight. "You gonna take all 6 of us, old man?" "No." That stopped them. The stranger reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a tobacco pouch. He opened it one-handed, still watching them, and began rolling a cigarette with the kind of patience that made Clara's skin prickle. "I won't fight you," he continued, tongue running along the paper's edge. "I'll just stand here, and when you attack me, I'll defend myself. Legal-like, self-defense. Sheriff won't have a choice but to call it justified." "You're bluffing," but Tommy's voice wavered. "Try me." The stranger struck a match against the wall, lit his cigarette, shook out the flame. Smoke curled up into the frozen air. "See? The thing about fights is they're unpredictable. Someone could get seriously hurt, someone could die, and then there'd be questions, witnesses. That piano player in the saloon already saw me walk this way. So did the bartender. People will remember." He took a long drag, exhaled. "So you got two choices. Walk away with your pride a little bruised, or stay and risk everything over some potato peels and a girl you don't even know. Your call." The silence stretched. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel her legs trembling, could taste the blood still pooling under her tongue. She waited for the explosion, for Tommy to charge, for the whole thing to collapse into violence. But it didn't. Pete Crenshaw looked at Tommy. Tommy looked at Virgil. Virgil looked at his bottle like it might have answers. "This ain't worth it," one of the ranch hands muttered. "Let's go." "We're not done." Tommy's voice was tight with humiliation. "This ain't over. It is for tonight." The stranger didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there smoking, radiating the kind of certainty that made grown men reconsider. One by one, they backed down. Pete first, muttering curses under his breath. Then Dale. The two strangers followed, clearly relieved. Virgil Hayes pointed at Clara with his bottle. "You got lucky, girl. But luck runs out." Tommy was the last to leave. He stared at the stranger for a long moment, memorizing his face, making promises with his eyes. Then he spat in the snow and walked away, shoulders rigid with rage. The alley emptied. Clara stood against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The stranger stayed where he was, finishing his cigarette in silence. He didn't look at her, didn't speak, just watched the mouth of the alley until the sounds of the men's boots faded completely. Then he ground out his cigarette under his heel and turned to her. "You hurt?" Clara tried to answer, but her voice wouldn't work. She nodded instead. "Can you walk?" Another nod, less certain. He moved closer, slow and careful, like she was a spooked animal. Up close, Claire could see his face better, weathered from years outside, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, eyes that were gray or maybe blue in this light. Hard to tell. He smelled like pine smoke and leather and something clean, like snow. "I'm Caleb Ward," he said quietly. "I'm going to help you stand up. If you don't want me to touch you, say so." Clara stared at him. No one had ever asked her permission before, not for anything. "It's okay," she whispered. His hand was gentle on her elbow, steadying her as she pushed off the wall. Pain lanced through her ribs and she gasped. Caleb's other hand came up, supporting her weight without comment, without judgment. "Ribs or stomach?" "Ribs, I think. Probably bruised, maybe cracked. You'll need to wrap them." He glanced at her face, where she could feel the swelling starting. "That tooth loose?" Clara's tongue explored carefully. "No, just bit my tongue." "Good. You got a place to clean up?" She nodded toward the building above them. "I rent a room. Above the laundry. Can you make it?" "I think so." But when she tried to step forward, her legs wobbled. Caleb caught her before she fell, his arms solid around her shoulders. "Easy. No rush." They made their way down the alley slowly, Clara leaning more heavily on this stranger than she wanted to admit. Each breath hurt. Each step reminded her of the boot in her ribs, the fist to her face, the way 6 men had looked at her like she was meat. She should thank him. Say something. But words felt impossible. They reached the side stairs to her room, and Clara paused, looking up at the narrow staircase. 13 steps. She'd climbed them 1,000 times. Tonight they looked like a mountain. "I can manage," she said, because pride was cheaper than gratitude. Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded and stepped back. "I'll wait here. Make sure you get inside." "You don't have to." "I'll wait." There was no arguing with that tone. Clara gripped the railing and started up, each step a small agony. Behind her, she felt Caleb's presence, watching but not hovering. By the time she reached her door, her vision was swimming again. The door wasn't locked. It never was. She owned nothing worth stealing. Clara pushed it open and looked back down. Caleb stood at the bottom of the stairs, hands in his pockets, looking up. "Thank you," Clara managed, for what you did." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Get some rest. Put something cold on that face." "I will." "Clara?" Her name and his voice stopped her. "Those men, they meant what they said. This isn't over for them." Ice crystallized in her stomach. "I know. You need to be careful." She almost laughed. Careful. As if careful had ever mattered. As if making herself small and quiet and invisible had protected her from anything except the illusion of safety. "I'm always careful," she said, and closed the door. Inside, her room was exactly as she'd left it. Small, cold, sparse. A narrow bed with a thin blanket, a washstand with a cracked mirror, a single chair. The window looked out over the alley, frost creeping across the glass in delicate patterns that looked like broken promises. Clara made it to the bed and sat down heavily. Her whole body hurt. Her face throbbed. Her ribs screamed every time she breathed. But worse than the pain was the fear, coiling in her gut like a living thing. Tommy Barlow's face, his promise. This ain't over. She knew what happened to girls who caused trouble in Red Hollow. She'd seen it before. Mary Hutchins, who'd accused the mayor's son of improprieties. She'd disappeared within a week. Officially moved on to Denver. Unofficially, no one knew and no one asked. That was how it worked. The town protected its own, and Clara had never been one of them. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "It's me," Caleb's voice. "Brought something." Clara stood slowly and opened the door a crack. He held out a bundle wrapped in a clean cloth. "Ice from the saloon's cold box. For your face." She took it, fingers brushing his. His hands were rough, scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard and didn't complain. "Thank you," she said again, feeling stupid for not having better words. "You got family in town? Someone who can check on you?" "No, no family." "Friends?" Clara almost laughed. "Not really." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly. Recognition, maybe. "You work at the saloon?" "The kitchen. Dishes, mostly. Whatever needs doing." He nodded slowly. "And those men? They come around often?" "Sometimes, when they're drunk, when they want to feel big." She pressed the ice to her cheek, wincing. "Usually they just talk. Tonight was different." "Because you fought back." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "I hit him with the bucket. Stupid. Brave." "Same thing, in the end." Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Sometimes. Not always." They stood there in the doorway, Clara holding ice to her battered face. This stranger who'd stepped out of nowhere to save her hovering in the hallway, like he wasn't sure what to do next. "I should let you rest," he said finally. "Where are you staying?" "Boarding house on 3rd. Got a room for a few days." "In Red Hollow? Why?" It was a blunt question, maybe rude, but Caleb didn't seem offended. "Passing through. Needed supplies before heading back up." "Back up?" "Mountain. I got a place north of here. Spend most of my time there." A mountain man. That explained the clothes, the self-sufficiency, the way he moved like someone used to being alone. Clara had heard stories about the men who lived up in the high country. Trappers, hunters, people who preferred wilderness to civilization. Most folks in town thought they were crazy or dangerous or both. Looking at Caleb Ward, Clara thought maybe they were just tired of people. Well, she shifted her weight, suddenly aware of how close he was, how strange this all was. "Thank you, again, for everything." "Clara." "Yes?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "What I said about those men meaning it. I wasn't trying to scare you, but you should know, humiliation like that, it festers, especially in small towns. They'll come back one way or another." "I know." She did. She'd always known deep down that her invisibility was temporary, that eventually someone would see her and decide she was a problem. But where else would I go? Caleb looked at her for a long moment, those gray-blue eyes unreadable. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small folding knife. "Here, keep this close. If they come at you again, don't aim for anything fancy. Go for soft spots, eyes, throat, gut. Fight dirty. Fight to run, not to win. Clara took the knife, the weight of it strange in her palm. She'd never owned a weapon before. I can't take this. Yes, you can. And you will. His voice left no room for argument. Promise me. She swallowed. I promise. Good. He turned to leave, boots heavy on the wooden floor, and Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Panic, maybe. Or loneliness. Or the terrible realization that this moment of kindness was about to end and she'd be alone again, waiting for Tommy Barlow's revenge. Mr. Ward? He stopped, looked back. Clara wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to beg him not to leave her here, wanted to say 1,000 things that all boiled down to the same desperate truth. She was scared and alone and had been for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to anyone. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, be careful. Tommy and his friends, they don't forget. Something that might have been warmth crossed Caleb's face. Neither do I. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs, leaving Clara standing in her doorway with a bundle of ice and a folding knife, and the strange, unsettling feeling that something in her life had just shifted in a direction she couldn't name. She closed the door and pressed her back against it, breathing through the pain, trying to think. Tomorrow she'd have to face Walter Mackenzie, explain why she had a black eye and bruised ribs. Tomorrow she'd have to walk past Tommy Barlow and his friends and pretend she wasn't terrified. Tomorrow the whole town would know what happened, would whisper about it over their breakfast and lunch and dinner, would judge her for causing trouble, for not knowing her place. But tonight, for just a few more hours, she could sit in this cold room and hold ice to her face and feel the weight of a stranger's kindness. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. Morning came too soon and too cold. Clara woke to sunlight cutting through her window and every part of her body screaming in protest. Her face had swollen overnight. She could feel it without looking. Her ribs were worse, each breath a sharp reminder of Pete Crenshaw's boot. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to find the courage to move. The knife Caleb had given her sat on the chair beside her bed, next to the bundle of melted ice. Real. Solid. Proof that last night had actually happened. Clara sat up slowly, biting back a groan, and made her way to the cracked mirror above her washstand. The face that looked back was a stranger's. The left side was purple and swollen, the eye nearly shut. Her lip was split. There was a bruise blooming along her jawline, dark and ugly. She looked like someone who'd lost a fight. She looked like someone who'd survive it anyway. Clara washed her face with cold water from the pitcher, wincing at every touch, then dressed in her work clothes, a simple brown dress that had seen better years, a stained apron, boots that let in water but were better than nothing. She tucked the knife into her apron pocket, feeling its weight like a secret. The walk to Mackenzie's saloon took 15 minutes. Normally Clara kept her head down, moved quick, tried not to be noticed. Today she couldn't help but see the stairs, Mrs. Patterson at the dry goods store, the Reverend's wife coming out of the church, 2 men outside the barber shop who stopped mid-conversation to watch her pass. Everyone saw. Everyone knew. By the time Clara reached the saloon's back entrance, her hands were shaking. The kitchen was already hot when she stepped inside, steam rising from pots on the stove, the smell of frying bacon and coffee thick in the air. Margot, the cook, looked up from the eggs she was scrambling and her face went white. Sweet Jesus, Clara, what happened to you? Trouble. Clara moved to the sink, started tying her apron. It's handled. Handled? Girl, you look like you got trampled by a horse. Margot set down her spatula and crossed the kitchen, hands on her hips. Who did this? Doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. Was it? She stopped, understanding crossing her features. Tommy Barlow? Clara's silence was answer enough. Margot's expression hardened. That boy is trash, always has been. His daddy, too. I'll talk to Walter, No. Clara's voice was sharper than she intended. Please, don't. Clara, it'll make it worse. You know it will. Clara turned on the water, started filling the first sink. I just need to keep my head down, do my work. It'll blow over. Margot looked like she wanted to argue, but before she could, Walter Mackenzie pushed through the door from the main room.
He was a thick man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a permanent expression of mild annoyance. He saw Clara's face and stopped. "Well," he crossed his arms, "I heard there was some excitement last night."
Clara kept washing dishes.
"Yes, sir."
"Tommy Barlow came by this morning, said you attacked him in the alley." Her hand stilled in the soapy water. "That's not what happened." "No, because he's got witnesses that say different. Says you came at him with a bucket, unprovoked. Says you were stealing kitchen scraps." "You told me I could take the scraps." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "You said I could have whatever was going to the pigs anyway."
"I said you could ask. I don't recall giving permission last night." "I did ask. You were counting receipts." You shrugged.
Walter's jaw tightened. "That's your word against theirs, Clara, and there's 6 of them. There was a 7th man. He saw everything. He'll tell you." "You mean the stranger? The mountain man nobody knows?" Walter shook his head. "Even if I could find him, his word won't mean much against established folks." Clara felt the trap closing. "So what happens now? Now I got a choice to make." Walter began pacing, hands clasped behind his back. "See, I run a business, a good business. I can't have my kitchen girl starting fights in the alley, can't have folks saying I harbor troublemakers. It's bad for reputation." "I didn't start anything. They attacked me." "That's your version." "It's the truth. Truth is a funny thing in a town this size, girl." Walter stopped pacing, looked at her with something that might have been regret but looked more like inconvenience. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm giving you 2 weeks. You'll work, keep your head down, save whatever money you can. Then you're done here." The words hit like another boot to the ribs. "You're firing me?" "I'm letting you go, gentle-like, giving you time to find something else." "There is nothing else," Claire's voice cracked. "I've looked. Nobody else is hiring, not for someone like me." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before causing trouble." "I didn't cause—" Claire stopped, breathing hard, feeling tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. "Please, Mr. Mackenzie, I need this job. I'll work extra hours. I'll take less pay. 2 weeks, Clara. That's generous, considering. Most folks would turn you out today." He moved toward the door, done with the conversation. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You're a good worker, but business is business." He left. The kitchen was silent except for the bubbling pots and Clara's ragged breathing. Margot stood frozen, spatula still in hand, looking stricken. "That bastard," she whispered. "That absolute bastard." Clara turned back to the sink, plunging her hands into the hot water, welcoming the burn. "It's fine." "It ain't fine. It's done." Clara's voice was flat. "I've got 2 weeks. I'll figure something out." But she wouldn't. They both knew it. In 2 weeks, she'd be out on the street with no job, no references, and winter settling into its cruelest months. The boarding house wouldn't keep her without rent money. The church might take her in for a night or 2, but charity had limits. She could leave town, try somewhere else. But where? Denver was 2 weeks' travel through mountain passes that killed people this time of year. Cheyenne was closer, but would ask the same questions. "Where are you from? Who knows you? What happened?" And Clara would have no good answers. The morning passed in a blur of dishes and silence. Margot tried to talk to her twice, offering comfort Clara couldn't accept. The other kitchen workers, a boy who hauled wood and an old man who did odd jobs, kept their distance, sensing trouble. By noon, Claire's hands were raw and her ribs hurt so badly she could barely stand up straight. She took her break in the alley, sitting on an overturned crate, eating the bread and cheese Margot had slipped her. The alley looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening. She could see the scattered potato peels from last night, already freezing into the mud. The spot where Tommy had hit her, the place where Caleb Ward had stood, smoking his cigarette with that terrible calm. She wondered where he was now. Probably already gone, back to his mountain, forgetting about the kitchen girl he'd saved. Clara finished her bread and stood, brushing crumbs from her apron. Time to go back inside. Time to face the rest of the day, and the day after that, and all the days until the 2 weeks ran out and she had to figure out how to survive what came next. She was halfway to the door when she heard boot steps behind her. Clara spun, hand going to the knife in her pocket. But it wasn't Tommy. It was Caleb Ward, leading a horse,
a big bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a saddle that looked well used but cared for. He saw Clara's defensive posture and stopped. Didn't mean to startle you. Clara's hand dropped. I thought you'd be gone by now. Planned to be. Got delayed. He studied her face, taking in the swelling, the bruises. How are you feeling? Like I got kicked by a horse. Fair enough. He tied the horse to a post and moved closer, but not too close. Respectful. I heard what happened. Mackenzie letting you go. Clara's stomach dropped. How did you? Small town. People talk. Caleb glanced at the saloon's back door. 2 weeks, they're saying. News travels fast. Always does. He was quiet for a moment, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. I've been thinking about last night, about what comes next for you. I'll manage. Will you? It was a fair question, and Clara had no good lie ready. I don't know, but that's my problem, not yours. You already did more than anyone else would have. That's a low bar. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. It's the only one I've got. Caleb nodded slowly, seeming to come to a decision. I'm heading back to my place tomorrow, up in the mountains about 2 days' ride from here. It's rough country, isolated. Winter's hard up there. Clara waited, not understanding where this was going. I need help, Caleb continued. Someone to cook, clean, help with basic camp work. Nothing improper. Separate quarters, clear rules, fair pay. It's honest work, but it's not easy. And it's not temporary. If you came, you'd be there till spring at least. Maybe longer. Clara's breath caught. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice. Caleb met her eyes. Stay here. Try to make 2 weeks stretch into something longer. Hope the town forgets and someone else hires you. Or come with me. Leave Red Hollow behind. Start different. I don't even know you. True. And I don't really know you. Could be we'd drive each other crazy within a week. His mouth twitched. But I saw how you handled yourself last night. You're tougher than you think. And toughness counts for a lot where I'm going. Clara's mind raced. This was insane. Following a stranger into the wilderness, miles from civilization, completely dependent on his word that he was who he said he was. Every cautious instinct screamed no. But what was the alternative? Stay here and wait for Tommy Barlow's next move? Trust that the town that had never cared about her would suddenly grow a conscience? Why? She asked quietly. Why would you do this? Caleb was silent for a long moment, looking past her at something she couldn't see. I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, and I know what it's like when someone decides you're not worth their time. He focused on her again. You deserve better than what this town's giving you. Figured I could offer an alternative. Out of kindness. Out of pragmatism. I need help. You need work. Seems straightforward, but it wasn't, and they both knew it. This was more than pragmatism. This was a stranger deciding that Clara Boone mattered enough to risk complications, to offer escape, to give her a choice when the world had only given her corners to be backed into. I need to think about it, Clara said. Fair enough. I'm leaving at dawn tomorrow. If you want to come, meet me at the livery stable on 3rd Street. Bring whatever you can carry. If you don't show, no hard feelings. He untied his horse, preparing to leave, and Clara found herself speaking before she could stop herself. Mr. Ward? Caleb. Caleb. The name felt strange on her tongue. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough for mountain living? He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, looking down at her. Then you'll get stronger. That's how it works up there. You adapt or you leave. But I've got a feeling you're better at adapting than you think. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that belonged to a different century, or maybe just a different kind of man, and rode away, leaving Clara standing in the alley with a choice that felt both impossible and inevitable. She watched until he disappeared around the corner, then looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Tomorrow at dawn. 2 days' ride into wilderness, away from everything she'd ever known, however little that was. Clara took a deep breath, feeling her ribs protest, and went back inside to finish her shift. That night, Clara sat in her small room and made a list. Not a written list. She had no paper worth wasting. A mental inventory of everything she owned, everything she could carry, everything that mattered. It didn't take long. 2 dresses, both worn.
The one she was wearing, and one slightly better that she kept for Sundays, though she rarely went to church. Undergarments, equally threadbare. The boots on her feet. A shawl her mother had made years ago, the only thing she had left from before. A hairbrush with missing bristles. The knife Caleb had given her. That was it. The sum total of Clara Boone's life fit in a mental list shorter than a grocery order. She stood and moved to the window, looking out over Red Hollow's nighttime streets. Lamplight glowed in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Normal people living normal lives, probably not thinking about the kitchen girl with the bruised face who was considering disappearing into the mountains with a stranger. Part of her wondered if she was being stupid. If this was how girls vanished and were never heard from again. If Caleb Ward was what he seemed or something darker. But that part was quieter than the part that remembered Tommy Barlow's fist, Walter Mackenzie's dismissal, the way this town had looked at her for 4 years like she was furniture that occasionally needed dusting. Clara pressed her hand against the cold glass and made her decision. She spent the next hour preparing. Not much to do, really. She packed her spare dress, the shawl, her hairbrush, rolled them into a tight bundle she could carry, tucked the knife back in her apron pocket, counted the money she'd saved, $3.40. Not much, but more than nothing. Then she lay down on her bed, still dressed, and tried to sleep. It didn't come easy. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caleb Ward's face, heard his quiet voice offering her a choice. Or she saw Tommy Barlow's sneer, felt his fist connecting with her face, knew that staying meant waiting for the next time. Somewhere around midnight, Clara gave up on sleep and just lay there, watching the shadows move across her ceiling, waiting for dawn. It came slower than she wanted and faster than she was ready for. Clara rose in the pre-dawn darkness, washed her face one last time in the basin, and looked around her room. 4 years she'd lived here. 4 years of washing dishes and keeping quiet and trying to be invisible. She felt nothing leaving it behind. Almost nothing. There was a small part of her, the scared part, the part that knew the world was dangerous and men were unpredictable and mountains killed people every winter, that wanted to stay. To choose the devil she knew over the one she didn't. But Clara had spent too many years being scared. She picked up her bundle, tucked it under her arm, and walked out without looking back. The streets were empty except for a few early risers heading to work. Clara moved quickly, head down, trying not to draw attention. The livery stable on 3rd Street sat at the edge of town, a low building that smelled like hay and horse and leather. Caleb was already there, checking his horse's tack by lantern light. He saw her coming and straightened but didn't smile. Didn't react at all, really, just nodded once like she'd confirmed something he'd already expected. "You came." "I came." Clara stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain. "If the offer's still open." "It is." Caleb gestured to a second horse, a sturdy-looking mare with a gentle eye. "This is Birdie. She's calm, won't give you trouble. You know how to ride?"
A little. It's been a while.
"You'll remember." He moved to help her secure her bundle to the saddle, his hands quick and efficient. "We'll take it slow the first day. Let you get used to it again." Clara watched him work, this stranger who was about to become her whole world, and felt the enormousness of what she was doing settle over her like a weight. "Caleb," he looked up, if this doesn't work out, if I can't handle it, will you bring me back?" His expression softened slightly. "If you want to leave, I'll make sure you get somewhere safe. You have my word." "Why should I trust your word?" "You shouldn't. Not yet." He finished with the bundle and stepped back. "Trust is earned. I'm just asking you to give me the chance to earn it." It was an honest answer, more honest than platitudes about everything being fine, about her having nothing to worry about. Clara took a breath and climbed onto Birdie's back. The mare shifted beneath her, patient, and Clara remembered the feel of a horse, the way you had to move with them instead of fighting. Caleb swung onto his own horse and looked at her in the growing light. Last chance to change your mind. Clara thought about her empty room, about Tommy Barlow's promise, about Walter Mackenzie's dismissal, about 4 years of being invisible. "I'm sure." Caleb nodded and turned his horse toward the north road. "Then let's go." They rode out of Red Hollow as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, painting the snow-covered mountains ahead in shades of orange and gold. Clara looked back once, seeing the town shrinking behind them, and felt something shift in her chest. Fear, maybe. Or maybe the beginning of something that looked like hope. She faced forward, gripped Bertie's reins, and followed Caleb Ward into the unknown. The first day on horseback nearly killed her. Clara had forgotten how much riding hurt when you weren't used to it. The constant jarring, the way your legs cramped from gripping the saddle, the ache that settled deep into your lower back and refused to leave. By midday, every part of her body was screaming, and they still had hours to go. Caleb didn't push hard, but he didn't coddle her either. He set a steady pace that ate up miles without exhausting the horses, stopping every few hours to let them drink from half-frozen streams and rest. During these breaks, he'd offer Clara water from his canteen and a piece of jerky, but he didn't ask how she was feeling, didn't hover. She appreciated that more than sympathy would have meant. The landscape changed as they climbed. Red Hollow sat in a valley, protected from the worst of the mountain weather. But as they followed the north road higher, the wind picked up, cutting through Clara's thin coat like it wasn't even there. Snow lay deeper here, and the trees grew thicker, pine and spruce that blocked out the sky. They saw no one else on the road. No travelers, no wagons, no signs of human life beyond the trail itself. Just endless white and dark green, the crunch of hooves in snow, and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Clara had never felt so small. By the time the sun started sinking toward the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and purple, Clara was barely holding on. Her hands were numb despite her gloves. Her face felt frozen, and her whole body hurt so badly that when Caleb finally stopped and said, "We'll camp here," she almost cried with relief. Almost. She slid off Bertie's back and immediately regretted it. Her legs buckled, and she grabbed the saddle to keep from falling. Caleb was beside her in an instant, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy. Give it a minute." "I'm fine," Clara lied through gritted teeth. "You're not, but you will be." He guided her to a fallen log and made her sit. "Rest. I'll handle the horses." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could pull her weight, but her body had other ideas. She sat and watched Caleb work, unsaddling both horses with efficient movements, checking their legs and hooves, hobbling them so they could graze on the sparse grass poking through the snow. He moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 times, someone for whom survival wasn't a struggle but a routine. When the horses were settled, he turned his attention to camp. Within 20 minutes, he'd cleared a space, gathered deadfall for firewood, and had a small blaze going. The warmth felt like a miracle. "Can you help with this?" Caleb held out a battered pot and a bundle of supplies. Clara stood on shaky legs and took them. "What am I making?" "Whatever you can manage. There's beans, some dried meat, onions if you want them. Coffee's in the tin." It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd expected. Clara set to work, grateful for something to do that didn't involve sitting on a horse. Her hands remembered the rhythms of cooking even if the rest of her felt broken. She got the beans soaking, diced the dried meat into a pot with snowmelt water, added onions and a pinch of salt from Caleb's supplies. While she cooked, Caleb set up a basic shelter, a canvas tarp strung between trees, angled to block the wind. He laid out bedrolls beneath it, maintaining a careful distance between them. "You'll sleep there," he said, pointing to the spot farthest from the fire. "Warmer, more protected. I'll take the outside." Clara stirred the pot, watching him from the corner of her eye. "You don't have to do that." "I know. I mean, you could—" "I know what you mean." Caleb's voice was firm but not unkind. "And I'm telling you how it's going to be. Clear boundaries. No confusion. You're safe here, Clara. That's not negotiable." She nodded, feeling something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "Okay." They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire. The food was plain but hot, and after a day in the cold, it tasted better than anything Clara had made at the saloon. She ate 2 bowls before her stomach finally felt satisfied. Caleb nursed a cup of coffee, staring into the flames. The firelight made his face look harder, older. The scar through his eyebrow stood out white against weathered skin. "How'd you get that?" Clara asked, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, that's rude. It's curious." Caleb touched the scar absently. "Bear 5 years ago. Got between her and her cubs without realizing. She reminded me to pay better attention." "You fought a bear?" "I ran from a bear. She got one swipe in before I made it to a tree." He smiled slightly.
Fighting bears is how you die. Running from them is how you learn lessons. Clara wrapped her hands around her own cup of coffee, letting the warmth seep in. Is that what mountain living is? Learning lessons the hard way?
Mostly, though some lessons you only get to learn once, so it pays to be careful.
The fire crackled. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Can I ask you something? Clara said quietly. Go ahead. Why do you live up here, away from everyone? Caleb was quiet for so long that Clara thought maybe she'd overstepped. Then he set down his cup and leaned back against a tree.
I was married once, long time ago. We had a place outside Laramie, small ranch, nothing fancy, but it was ours. We were going to build a life there. His voice was matter-of-fact, but something in it made Clara's chest ache. Fever took her the second winter. After that, the ranch didn't make much sense. Too many memories. Too many reminders. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. He glanced at her. I tried town living for a while after, worked different jobs, moved around, but people exhausted me. All the talking, the politics, the caring about things that didn't matter. So I came up here, built a cabin, learned to trap, found out I preferred my own company. Until now. Until now. He picked up a stick and poked at the fire. What about you? How'd you end up in Red Hollow? Clara hesitated. She had spent 4 years not talking about her past, not because it was shameful, but because no one had ever cared enough to ask. But sitting here in the firelight, exhausted and sore and more honest than she'd been in years, the words came easier than expected. My mother and I were traveling to Denver. She'd heard there was work there, better opportunities. We only stopped in Red Hollow because she got sick. Cough that wouldn't quit, fever that came and went. Clara stared into her coffee. The doctor said she needed rest. We rented a room above the laundry. I took the job at the saloon to pay for it. She didn't get better. No, 3 weeks later she was gone, and suddenly I was alone in a town where I knew nobody, with debts I couldn't pay and nowhere else to go. Clara's throat tightened. So I stayed, kept working, kept my head down. Figured eventually I'd save enough to leave, but there was never enough. Caleb nodded slowly. Your mother, what was she like? The question surprised Clara. Most people, when they asked about her past at all, wanted facts, not feelings.
She was tired, Clara said finally. Life had worn her down. My father left when I was small. After that, it was just us, moving from town to town, her taking whatever work she could find. She tried hard, but sometimes trying isn't enough. No, sometimes it's not.
They sat in silence, and Clara realized this was the most she'd talked about herself in years. It should have felt strange, exposing her history to someone she barely knew. Instead, it felt like setting down something heavy she'd been carrying too long. Get some sleep, Caleb said eventually, standing and stretching. Tomorrow's going to be harder than today. Clara's body, which had briefly forgotten its pain, reminded her forcefully. How is that possible? We leave the road tomorrow, start heading into real wilderness. It's rougher, steeper. He saw her expression and his mouth twitched. But you'll manage. You did fine today. I nearly fell off my horse. But you didn't. That's what counts. Clara crawled into her bedroll, every muscle protesting. The ground was hard beneath her, and the cold crept in despite the fire. But exhaustion was a better blanket than warmth, and within minutes she was asleep. She woke once in the night, disoriented and aching. The fire had burned down to coals. Across the dying light, she could see Caleb's shape, sitting up, keeping watch. He didn't look her way, didn't acknowledge her waking, just sat there, a silent guardian between her and whatever darkness held. Clara closed her eyes and slept again. The second day was worse. They left the road mid-morning, following what Caleb called a game trail, but looked to Clara like random spaces between trees. The path climbed steadily, switchbacking up slopes that made Bertie's breathing come hard. Snow lay thicker here, and several times they had to dismount and lead the horses through drifts that came up to Clara's knees. Her whole body hurt. The saddle had rubbed blisters on her inner thighs. Her hands were cracked and bleeding from the cold. Every breath of frozen air burned in her lungs. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. Because Caleb wasn't complaining either, despite carrying twice her weight in supplies and breaking trail through snow that must have been just as exhausting for him. Around noon, they stopped beside a frozen creek. Caleb smashed through the ice with a rock and filled their canteens while Clara tried to remember what her feet felt like when they weren't numb. "How much farther?" she asked, hating how weak her voice sounded. Caleb studied the terrain ahead. "If we make good time, we'll reach the cabin by dark. If not, we'll camp again." "What determines good time?" "Weather, trails, whether we run into problems." "What kind of problems?" He glanced at her. "The kind you don't worry about unless they happen." They pressed on. The afternoon stretched into a blur of white and green and pain. Clara's vision narrowed to the space directly in front of her, Bertie's neck, the trail, the next step. She stopped thinking about Red Hollow, about Tommy Barlow, about anything except the rhythm of movement and the desperate hope that eventually it would end. The sun was touching the western peaks when Caleb finally stopped and said, "There." Clara looked up, squinting through exhaustion. Ahead, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, sat a cabin. It was small, maybe 20 feet across, built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to gray. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A covered porch ran along the front, and behind the cabin, Clara could see what looked like a lean-to shelter and a small corral. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "You kept the fire going?" she asked. "Built it up before I left for town. Banked it proper. Should still have coals." Caleb urged his horse forward. "Come on, let's get you inside." The next hour passed in a fog. Caleb handled the horses while Clara stumbled into the cabin and discovered it was blessedly warm. The interior was simple: a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table and chairs, a bed built into one corner, and shelves lining the walls. Everything was neat, organized, the space of someone who lived alone and liked it that way. Caleb came in carrying her bundle and a load of supplies. "Sit, I'll get the fire built back up." Clara collapsed into one of the chairs and watched him work. He moved through the space with practiced efficiency, feeding the fire, lighting a lamp, starting water heating in a pot. The cabin smelled like pine smoke and something else. Coffee, maybe, or leather. "There's a lean-to out back," Caleb said without turning around. "That's where you'll sleep. It's got a stove, a bed, everything you need. Private. I'll show you after you've warmed up." Clara's exhausted brain tried to process this. "You built me my own space?" "Built it last summer. Was going to use it for storage, but this works better." He ladled hot water into a cup, added something from a tin, and handed it to her. "Drink. It'll help." It was some kind of herb tea, bitter but warming. Clara drank it gratefully, feeling sensation slowly return to her extremities. As the cold receded, other aches rushed in to fill the space. "I need you to listen," Caleb said, sitting across from her. "Tomorrow, you're going to hurt worse than today. Day after that, you'll start to feel better. But right now, your body's in shock from 2 days of hard riding in cold weather. You need to eat, get warm, and sleep. Don't try to do anything else." "I can help." "Not tonight, you can't. Tonight you rest." His voice left no room for argument. "Starting tomorrow, we'll figure out what work needs doing. But today, you take care of yourself. Understood?" Clara nodded, too tired to fight. Caleb made her eat beans and cornbread that appeared from somewhere, then showed her to the lean-to. It was small but well built, attached to the back of the main cabin with its own door. Inside was a narrow bed piled with blankets, a small stove already warming the space, hooks on the wall for clothes, and a window that looked out over the forest. "There's a chamber pot under the bed," Caleb said from the doorway. "Outhouse is 30 feet north, but use the pot tonight. Too easy to get lost in the dark if you don't know the area." "Okay. Anything else you need?" Clara looked around the space, her space, and felt something crack open in her chest. A room of her own, warm, safe, built by someone who'd thought about her comfort before she'd even agreed to come. "No," she managed. This is good." Caleb nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Clara, you did well today. Better than most would have." He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara stood alone in her new room and finally let herself cry. Not from pain, though there was plenty of that. Not from fear, though the magnitude of what she'd done was starting to sink in. She cried from relief, from exhaustion, from the strange, overwhelming realization that for the first time in 4 years, She wasn't invisible. Someone had built her a room. Someone had noticed she existed. It was more than Red Hollow had ever given her. Clara pulled off her boots, her coat, her dress, and crawled into bed wearing her undergarments. The blankets were heavy and smelled like cedar. The stove ticked softly as the metal cooled. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant water. She was asleep before she could think about tomorrow. The next 5 days passed in a haze of work and pain and gradual adjustment. Caleb had been right about the third day being the worst. Clara woke unable to move without groaning, every muscle locked tight. But she forced herself up anyway, because lying in bed felt like admitting defeat. She discovered quickly that life in the mountains operated on different rules than life in town. There was no schedule beyond what the day required, no boss watching the clock, no customers to please, just work that needed doing and the understanding that if it didn't get done, you suffered the consequences. Caleb showed her the basics without condescension. How to split kindling so the stove stayed hot. How to check the horses each morning for injuries or illness. How to melt snow for washing water and keep the drinking water from freezing. How to read the weather by watching the sky and the way the wind moved. He didn't explain things twice, but he also didn't criticize when Clara made mistakes. When she let the fire burn too hot and wasted wood, he just showed her how to bank it properly. When she forgot to close the chicken coop door and came back to find 3 hens exploring the cabin, he helped her catch them without comment. The chickens had been a surprise. So was the smokehouse, the root cellar, and the impressive stock of supplies Caleb had put away for winter. The man lived alone, but he lived prepared. Had a bad year once, he explained when Clara commented on it. Snowed in for 2 months. Ran out of coffee in week 3. Nearly lost my mind. He glanced at her. Now I keep extra of everything. Gradually, Clara found her rhythm. Morning meant feeding the chickens, checking the horses, bringing in firewood. Midday meant cooking. Simple meals, but more than just beans. She discovered Caleb had flour, dried apples, even sugar tucked away. Evening meant preparing for the next day, mending clothes, or whatever tasks the season demanded. And in between there was talking, not constant, Caleb wasn't much for chatter, but enough. Over coffee in the morning, Caleb would mention which traps needed checking. Over dinner, Clara would tell him about fixing the loose hinge on the chicken coop. Small exchanges that slowly built into something like understanding. On the 6th day, Clara woke and realized something had changed. Her body still hurt, but it was a working hurt, not an injured hurt. Her hands had developed calluses. Her legs didn't shake when she walked. She was getting stronger. That afternoon, Caleb announced they were going to check the trap line. It's a few miles out, he said, loading supplies into a pack. We'll be gone most of the day. You up for it? Clara thought about saying no, claiming she needed more time to recover. But she was tired of being weak, tired of being the one who needed protecting. I'm up for it. The trap line was exactly what it sounded like. A circuit through the forest where Caleb had set snares and deadfalls for small game. He moved through the woods like he'd been born there, reading signs Clara couldn't see, knowing which paths to take. They found a rabbit in the 3rd trap, already frozen. Caleb reset the snare efficiently and moved on. 2 traps later, they found a marten, beautiful dark fur, worth good money. Trading post down in Elkridge buys pelts, Caleb explained, skinning the animal with quick practiced movements. It's how I make cash for what I can't grow or make. Clara watched, fighting queasiness. She'd seen animals butchered before, but never like this. Never in the wild, never this close. You'll learn to do this too, Caleb said. Not today, but eventually. It's necessary work. I know. Knowing and doing are different. He finished with the marten and wrapped the pelt carefully. You don't have to like it. You just have to be able to do it when it matters. They finished the circuit as the sun dropped toward the horizon. On the walk back, Caleb pointed out things Clara had missed. Deer tracks, an eagle's nest, the entrance to a bear den. Empty right now, but remember where it is. The forest was starting to make sense, starting to be less a wall of undifferentiated trees and more a place with patterns, rhythms, logic. That night, Clara cooked the rabbit. She'd done it before at the saloon, but somehow this felt different, more immediate. The animal had been alive this morning. Now it was dinner. The directness of it sat heavy in her stomach. You're quiet, Caleb observed. Just thinking. About? Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than deflection. About how different this is. In town, meat came from the butcher. You paid money, you got your cut, you didn't think about where it came from. Here, you see everything, the killing, the skinning, all of it. Does it bother you? Yes. No, I don't know. Clara stirred the pot unnecessarily. It should bother me more, shouldn't it? But mostly I just feel tired. Caleb nodded. That's normal. The first few times you're close to death, animal or human, it hits hard. After a while, you learn to carry it different. Not forget, not ignore, just file it away so it doesn't eat you alive. Has it gotten easier for you? In some ways, in others, no. He took a drink of coffee. I still think about every animal I kill, still thank it in my own way, but I don't lose sleep over it anymore. It's part of the cycle up here. They ate in silence. The rabbit was good. Claire had roasted it with wild onions Caleb kept dried. Simple food, but satisfying in a way the saloon meals had never been. After dinner, Caleb pulled out a worn book and read by lamplight. Clara mended a tear in her dress, her needle moving in and out with a rhythm that was almost meditative. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a sound that would have terrified her a week ago, but now just felt like background noise. Storm coming, Caleb said without looking up from his book. How can you tell? Wind shifted, smells different, and my knee's aching. He smiled slightly. Old injuries make good weather predictors. Should we prepare? Already did. Wood stacked, animals are secure, water's inside. We just wait it out. The storm hit around midnight. Clara woke to thunder, rare in winter but not impossible, and the sound of sleet hammering the roof. She lay in her bed listening to it, oddly comforted by the sturdy walls around her. The stove had gone out, but enough blankets kept her warm. Morning revealed a landscape transformed. Ice coated everything, turning the forest into something from a dream. The chickens refused to leave their coop. The horses stood huddled together under the lean-to, waiting for the world to make sense again. Caleb and Clara spent the day inside, doing the small tasks that kept life running. He oiled leather. She organized the root cellar. They worked in companionable silence, and Clara realized this was becoming normal. The quiet, the work, the absence of pretense. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb said, "You've been here a week." Clara looked up from the sock she was darning. "Has it been that long?" "About. Wanted to check in, see how you're feeling about things." It was the first time he'd asked directly. Clara set down her mending and considered. "It's hard," she said honestly. "Harder than I expected. My body hurts, I'm always cold, and I still don't know what half the things in the smokehouse are. But I'm not scared." The realization surprised her even as she said it. In Red Hollow, I was scared every day. Scared of losing my job, scared of Tommy Barlow and men like him, scared of winter coming and having nowhere to go. Here, I'm uncomfortable, I'm challenged, but I'm not scared. Caleb nodded slowly. Fear and discomfort aren't the same thing. No, they're not. You planning to stay then, or should I start thinking about how to get you somewhere else come spring? Clara met his eyes, gray-blue in the firelight, steady and patient, waiting for her answer without pressure, without expectation. "I want to stay," she said, "if you'll have me. The work doesn't get easier." "I know. Winter's just starting. We've got 3, maybe 4 more months of this." "I know." "And you still want to stay?" Clara thought about Red Hollow, about her tiny room above the laundry, her invisible existence, the way people looked through her instead of at her. She thought about Tommy Barlow's fist and Walter Mackenzie's dismissal and 4 years of swallowing her voice. Then she looked around the cabin, rough but sturdy, warm despite the storm, filled with the simple evidence of a life built deliberately. A place where work mattered and words meant something and a person's worth wasn't measured by how well they disappeared. "I want to stay," she repeated. Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right then. We'll make it work." He went back to his oiling, and Clara went back to her darning, and outside the storm continued to rage. But inside, in the warm glow of the fire, something had been decided, a commitment made, not with grand words or dramatic gestures, but with the quiet understanding that sometimes survival meant choosing the hard thing over the familiar thing. Clara Boone had made her choice. Now she just had to prove she could live with it. The days turned into weeks, and winter settled over the mountains with brutal certainty. Snow fell regularly, piling up against the cabin walls until the windows looked out on white. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being drawn. The world contracted to the small circle of warmth they maintained through constant work. But Clara was learning to read the weather, to anticipate needs before they became emergencies, learning which tasks could wait and which couldn't, learning that survival wasn't one big dramatic moment, but 1,000 small decisions made correctly. She was also learning about Caleb, not through questions, he wasn't the type to share easily, but through observation. The way he checked the horses with gentle hands despite his rough exterior, the way he rationed coffee carefully but always made sure Clara had some, the way he gave clear instructions but never talked down to her. He was lonely, she realized, not in a way that made him desperate for company, but in a way that had carved deep grooves in his soul. He'd chosen solitude as protection, but solitude had its costs. One night, 3 weeks after her arrival, Clara woke to the sound of shouting. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, trying to place the noise. It came from the main cabin, Caleb's voice, raised in distress. She grabbed her shawl and ran outside, the cold hitting her like a wall. Through the cabin window, she could see him thrashing in his bed, caught in some nightmare. Clara hesitated at the door, unsure, then pushed it open. Caleb! He didn't wake, just kept fighting invisible demons, his face twisted in anguish. Clara approached carefully, remembering stories of men who woke violent from bad dreams. Caleb, it's Clara. You're having a nightmare. You need to wake up. She touched his shoulder lightly, ready to jump back. His eyes snapped open. For a second he didn't recognize her, and Clara saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Pure animal terror. Then awareness returned, and he sat up, breathing hard. Clara, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's fine. You were dreaming. He scrubbed his hands over his face, still shaking. I don't usually do that anymore. Bad one? Yeah. He stood, moving to the fire, needing something to do with his hands. You should go back to bed. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. Clara could see it in the set of his shoulders, the tremor in his fingers as he added wood to the fire. Do you want to talk about it? No. Okay. Clara moved to the stove, finding the coffee tin. Then we won't talk. We'll just sit until you can sleep again. Caleb watched her make coffee in silence. When it was ready, she poured 2 cups and sat at the table. After a long moment, he joined her. They sat without speaking, drinking coffee in the middle of the night, and Clara understood something important. Caleb had saved her in that red hollow alley, had offered her escape, had given her dignity and work and a place to belong. But he was just as broken as she was, just as scarred, just as desperate for something he couldn't quite name. They were both survivors. Both people whom the world had chewed up and spit out, both trying to build something from the wreckage. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. For what? For not making it a thing, Clara smiled slightly. Bad dreams aren't a thing, they're just bad dreams. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people haven't lived the kind of life that gives you nightmares. She met his eyes across the table. We're even now. You pulled me out of my nightmare in Red Hollow. I pulled you out of yours tonight. That's how this works. Caleb's expression softened. Yeah, I guess it is. They finished their coffee as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Eventually, Caleb's breathing steadied, the tension leaving his shoulders. When Clara finally stood to return to her own bed, he didn't try to stop her. Clara? She turned at the door. I'm glad you stayed. The words settled over her like a blanket. Simple, honest, worth more than poetry. Me too, she said, and meant it. Winter deepened, and with it came a rhythm Clara had never known existed. Days started before dawn. Feed the animals, check the water, build up the fires. Then breakfast, usually cornmeal mush or leftover biscuits with whatever preserves Caleb had put up the previous summer. After that came the day's work, which varied depending on weather and need. Some days they checked trap lines. Other days they split wood until Clara's arms screamed. Sometimes they just hunkered down and waited for storms to pass. Clara's hands, once soft from dishwater, grew rough and capable. Her body, which had always carried extra weight that made her a target for cruelty in Red Hollow, became strong in ways she'd never imagined. She could split kindling now without thinking about it, could carry 2 full water buckets from the creek without stopping to rest, could walk through knee-deep snow for hours without collapsing. The mirror in her lean-to showed a different person than the one who'd left Red Hollow. Her face had color now, wind-burned and healthy, instead of pale and drawn. Her eyes looked clearer. Even her posture had changed. She stood straighter, moved with more certainty. Caleb noticed but didn't comment directly. He just started giving her harder tasks, trusting her with more responsibility, teaching her to track animals, to read signs in the snow, to understand the forest language. See that? He pointed to marks on a tree trunk one morning in early February. Bear claw. Old from last fall, but it tells you where they move. Come spring, avoid this area. Clara studied the gouges in the bark. Why mark territory if they're hibernating? Habit. Instinct. Same reason you lock your door even when you know nobody's coming. He moved on, expecting her to follow. Everything in the wild is about patterns. You learn the patterns, you survive. They were 2 miles from the cabin, checking the northern trapline, when Clara saw the smoke. It was faint, just a thin column rising above the trees to the southeast. She stopped, squinting through the bright winter light. Caleb. He was already looking. His expression went tight. How far? Clara asked. Mile, maybe less, too close. He scanned the forest, calculating. Could be trappers passing through, could be hunters. Or it could be trouble. He met her eyes. We're going back to the cabin. Now. No argument. They moved fast, Caleb setting a pace that had Clara breathing hard within minutes. He didn't explain, didn't slow down, just pushed through the snow with single-minded urgency. Clara followed, her heart hammering not from exertion, but from the tension radiating off him. They reached the cabin to find everything as they'd left it. No tracks in the snow except their own. No signs of disturbance. But Caleb didn't relax. Inside, he said. Stay there while I check the perimeter. Clara obeyed, watching through the window as he circled the property, reading tracks, looking for anything out of place. When he finally came back inside, his face was grim. Someone was here. 2 days ago, maybe 3. Looked around, didn't touch anything, then left heading south. How do you know they didn't touch anything? Because I set tells. Little things out of place that only I'd notice. They're all exactly where I left them. He moved to a cupboard, pulled out a rifle Clara hadn't known was there, started checking it methodically. But they were scouting, looking to see what was here, who lived here. Clara's mouth went dry. You think it's them, from Red Hollow. I think smoke that close and tracks that fresh aren't coincidence. Caleb loaded the rifle with practiced efficiency. And I think we need to be ready. For what? For whatever comes next. That night, Caleb didn't sleep in the cabin. He took up position on the porch, rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. Clara tried to sleep in her lean-to, but couldn't. Every sound made her jump, the crack of ice, the whisper of wind, the settling of logs in the cold. She kept thinking about Tommy Barlow's face, about his promise that it wasn't over, about 6 men who'd seen her as something they could break just because they wanted to. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and joined Caleb on the porch. He didn't send her away. Can't stop thinking about it? He asked quietly. No. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold. I keep wondering if I should have stayed, if coming here just brought trouble to your door. Trouble was coming regardless. At least this way you're not facing it alone. But you could have avoided all this. You didn't owe me anything. Caleb was quiet for a moment, breath clouding in the freezing air. When Sarah, my wife, when she died, I was angry. Not at her, not at the fever, just angry at everything. At life for being unfair. At myself for not being able to fix it. I came up here to get away from that anger. Thought isolation would cure it. Did it? No. It just gave me space to carry it around without bothering anyone else. He shifted the rifle slightly. Then one night in Red Hollow, I saw 6 men cornering a woman in an alley, and I realized anger doesn't have to be useless. Sometimes it can be fuel for doing something right. Clara looked at him in the moonlight. This weathered, scarred man who'd chosen to care when caring was inconvenient.
You could have just scared them off and walked away. Could have. Didn't feel right. He glanced at her. You reminded me of Sarah in that moment. Not looks, not personality. Just the way you stood up despite being terrified. The way you hit that bastard with the bucket, even knowing what would happen. Sarah was like that, brave even when she shouldn't be. I'm not brave. I was desperate. Same thing sometimes.
They sat in silence, watching the forest. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The sound echoed through the trees, lonely and wild. If they come, Clara said slowly, what happens? Depends on what they want. If they're just trying to scare you, I send them away. If they want more than that, he checked the rifle again, then we deal with it. Have you ever killed a man? The question hung in the frozen air. Caleb took a long time answering. Yes, during the war. And once after, when 3 men tried to rob my ranch while Sarah was there alone. His voice was flat, emotionless. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry either. Some things are worth defending. And I'm one of those things. He looked at her directly. You're under my protection. That means something to me, even if it means nothing to them. So yes, Clara, you're worth defending. The certainty in his voice made her throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and they went back to watching the darkness together. Dawn came cold and bright, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Nothing had emerged from the forest. No men, no threats, just the usual morning sounds of birds and wind. But the tension didn't break. For 3 days, they stayed close to the cabin. Caleb kept the rifle within reach at all times. Clara found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, jumping at shadows. The forest that had started to feel like home now felt full of eyes. On the 4th day, Caleb announced they were going hunting. We need meat, he said, loading supplies into a pack. And sitting around waiting makes us predictable. Better to move. Is that smart? If someone's watching, they already know where we live. Might as well make sure we've got food when whatever's coming comes. They headed north, opposite from where the smoke had been. The morning was bitter, 20 below, maybe colder. Clara's breath froze on her scarf. Her fingers went numb despite her gloves. But Caleb pressed on, following game trails only he could see. 2 hours out, they found deer sign, fresh tracks, droppings that steamed in the cold. Caleb slowed, moving with careful silence, and Clara matched his pace. He'd been teaching her to hunt, how to move quietly, where to step, when to freeze. Now she put those lessons to use. They found the deer in a small clearing, a young buck pawing at the snow to reach frozen grass beneath. Caleb brought the rifle up slowly, sighting carefully. Clara held her breath. The shot cracked through the silence. The buck dropped, dead before it hit the ground. Clean kill, Caleb said with satisfaction. Help me dress it. They worked together, Caleb showing Clara how to bleed the animal, how to open it without puncturing the organs, how to remove what was useful and leave what wasn't. The work was messy and cold, and Clara's hand shook, but she didn't turn away. This was survival. This was life in the mountains. You didn't get to be squeamish. By the time they finished, both were blood-stained and exhausted. Caleb rigged a travois to drag the carcass back, and they started the long walk home. They were a mile from the cabin when Caleb stopped abruptly. What? Clara whispered. He pointed to the snow ahead. Fresh tracks. Boot prints, multiple sets, crossing their path and heading toward the cabin. How many? Clara's voice was barely audible. Caleb crouched, studying the prints. 5, maybe 6. Moving fast. Maybe an hour ahead of us. Clara's heart hammered. They're at the cabin. Probably. Caleb stood, his face hard. We can't go straight in. They might be waiting. So what do we do? He thought for a moment, then turned to her. There's a ridge about a quarter-mile east. High ground, good sight lines. We go there, watch, figure out what we're dealing with. And then? Then we decide. They cached the deer meat, covering it with snow, and moved through the trees toward the ridge. Caleb led, rifle ready, and Clara followed with her hand on the knife in her pocket. The knife Caleb had given her that first night in Red Hollow. It seemed like a lifetime ago. The ridge offered a clear view of the cabin and surrounding area. They settled behind an outcropping of rocks and watched. 6 horses stood in the clearing. 6 men moved around the property, looking in windows, trying doors. Even from a distance, Clara recognized the shapes. Tommy Barlow, tall and swagger-heavy. Pete and Dale Crenshaw, moving together like they always did. Virgil Hayes, drinking from a bottle. And two others she didn't know but could guess, friends of theirs, men cut from the same cloth. Her stomach twisted. "They're looking for you," Caleb said quietly. "Been here a while from the looks of it." "What do we do?" "We wait. Let them finish searching. Once they realize you're not there, they'll either leave or settle in to wait. Either way gives us information." They watched for 2 hours. The men ransacked the cabin. Clara could see them throwing things out the door, breaking what they found, acting like children having a tantrum. They checked the lean-to, the smokehouse, even the chicken coop. When they didn't find Clara, their frustration turned to destruction. "They're wrecking everything," Clara whispered, watching them smash her few possessions. "Things can be replaced." Caleb's voice was ice. "What matters is you're not in there." Finally, as the sun started its descent toward the western peaks, the men gathered in front of the cabin. Clara and Caleb were too far to hear words, but the body language was clear. Argument, disagreement, Tommy Barlow gesturing angrily while the others looked uncertain. Then Tommy pulled something from his coat. Even at this distance, Clara could see the flash of glass, a bottle of kerosene. "No," she breathed. Tommy splashed the kerosene across the cabin's front wall. Virgil did the same to the lean-to. The other men backed away and Tommy struck a match. The cabin caught fast, flames racing up the dry logs, black smoke billowing into the clear sky. Within minutes, both structures were engulfed. Everything, the food stores, the supplies, Caleb's books, Clara's few possessions, burning. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her, heard his sharp intake of breath. But he didn't move, didn't raise the rifle, just watched his home burn with an expression that made her chest ache. The men stood watching their handiwork, laughing. Then they mounted their horses and rode south, back toward Red Hollow, leaving the cabin to burn. Caleb and Clara waited until they were long gone. Then they moved down from the ridge in silence. By the time they reached the clearing, the cabin was a smoking ruin. The roof had collapsed. The walls were crumbling. Everything inside was ash. The lean-to was worse, completely destroyed, nothing left but charred timber and nails. Clara stood in the snow, staring at the destruction, unable to process it. Everything she'd built over the past 2 months, the safety, the routine, the sense of belonging, gone. Erased by men who couldn't stand the idea of her being beyond their reach. Caleb moved through the ruins methodically, checking what could be salvaged. Not much. A few metal tools that had survived the heat. The rifle he'd brought with them. Some canned goods from the root cellar, which had escaped the fire. "I'm sorry," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault." Caleb stopped, looked at her. "No, this is their fault. Don't take that on. But if you hadn't come, you'd be dead in Red Hollow, and I'd still be alone up here wondering why I bothered." He kicked at a charred beam. "They made their choice. We'll make ours." "What choice? They destroyed everything?" "They destroyed buildings, wood and nails and stone." Caleb's eyes were hard. "We're still alive, still armed, still know this country better than they ever will. That's what matters." "Where do we even go? We can't survive out here without shelter." "There's a line shack about 5 miles north, old hunting cabin I use sometimes. It's small, barely standing, but it's got a roof and a stove. We can make it work until spring." Clara looked at the smoking ruins, then at Caleb, then back at the destruction. Something was shifting inside her, the fear and shock crystallizing into something harder. Anger, real anger, the kind that burned clean instead of eating you from inside. "They think this is over," she said quietly. "They think they won. They think a lot of things. We should prove them wrong." Caleb studied her face for a long moment. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting they came here to teach me a lesson. Maybe it's time someone taught them one." Clara met his eyes. "I'm tired of running. Tired of being the one who has to disappear because men like Tommy Barlow can't stand being told no. They burned your home, Caleb. They destroyed everything you built. And they'll just go back to Red Hollow and laugh about it. Probably. So we do something about it." "Like what?" Clara didn't have an answer. She just knew that something inside her had snapped. The part that accepted things, that made herself small, that apologized for existing. That part was ash now, burned up with the cabin. I don't know yet, she admitted, but we can't let them get away with this. Caleb was quiet, looking at the ruins. When he spoke, his voice was measured. Revenge is a dangerous road, Clara. Once you start down it, it's hard to turn back. I'm not talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. In the mountains, those words mean the same thing. He sighed. But you're right about one thing. We can't let them think they can burn people out and face no consequences. That's how men like Tommy Barlow operate, through fear and intimidation. Someone needs to stand up and say enough. So we go back to Red Hollow. Not we, me. I'll go back, talk to the sheriff, make a formal complaint. No. Clara's voice was firm. I'm going with you. This is my fight. It's too dangerous. It was too dangerous when you stepped into that alley. You did it anyway. She straightened her shoulders. I'm not hiding anymore, Caleb. I'm done being the girl who runs and hides and hopes people forget about her. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He nodded slowly. All right, together. But we do this smart. We don't go in guns blazing. We go in legal, proper, with witnesses and evidence. We make them face what they did in front of the whole town. How? I'm still working that out. He glanced at the dying embers of his home. First, we get to the line shack. Make sure we survive the night. Then we plan. They salvaged what they could from the ruins, the canned goods, the metal tools, a few unburned blankets from the root cellar. Caleb retrieved the deer meat from where they'd cached it. Not much to show for 2 months of work, but enough to keep them alive. The walk to the line shack took 3 hours through deepening snow. By the time they arrived, full dark had fallen and the temperature was dropping fast. The shack was exactly what Caleb had described, small, drafty, barely more than 4 walls and a roof. But it had a stove and it would keep the wind off. Caleb got a fire going while Clara assessed their supplies. They had food for maybe 2 weeks if they were careful. After that, they'd need to hunt, trap, find more. The line shack had no storage, no preserved goods, just a single room with a broken window and a door that didn't quite close. This is temporary, Caleb said, reading her expression. We'll make do. Clara sat on one of the 2 chairs, the only furniture besides a narrow cot, and felt exhaustion hit like a wave. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. You should eat, Caleb said, heating beans in a pot. Then sleep. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. You'll need your strength. They shared the beans in silence. Outside, wind howled through the trees, finding every crack in the shack's walls. The fire struggled against the drafts, and Clara realized this place was going to be even harder than the cabin had been. But she didn't complain, didn't voice the fear that was creeping back in now that the anger had cooled, just ate her beans and tried not to think about everything they'd lost. Clara. She looked up. Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What you said earlier, about being tired of running, I understand that, but I need you to understand something too. What? Going back to Red Hollow means facing those men again, means standing in front of the whole town and telling your story. Means people will judge you, question you, maybe not believe you. His voice was gentle but firm. It won't be easy, and there's no guarantee it'll work. The law doesn't always side with people like us. I know. Do you? Because once we start this, once we make accusations, there's no taking it back. You'll be known, visible, the opposite of everything you've been trying to be for 4 years. Clara set down her bowl and met his eyes. Good. I'm tired of being invisible. Never protected me anyway. It might have kept you alive. Being alive isn't the same as living. She stood, pacing the small space. You asked me earlier what I was suggesting. Here's what I think we should do. We go back to Red Hollow. We find the sheriff. We tell him what happened. We bring him up here to see the ruins. We make Tommy Barlow and his friends answer for what they did. And if the sheriff won't listen, then we make enough noise that someone else will. We talk to the newspaper editor, the mayor, anyone who'll hear us. We make it public. We make it so they can't just sweep this under the rug. Caleb nodded slowly. That could work, if we're smart about it, if we have proof. We have the burned cabin. We have your testimony about the tracks.
We have my story about what happened in Red Hollow. Your word against theirs. 6 men will swear they were nowhere near here.
Then we find someone who saw them leave town. Someone who can confirm they rode this direction. Clara was thinking out loud now, piecing together a strategy. Small towns talk. Someone will have noticed. Maybe. Caleb didn't sound convinced, but he wasn't arguing either. We'll need to be careful. Plan every step. One mistake, and they'll turn it around on us. So we don't make mistakes. Easier said than done. Clara returned to her chair, feeling the weight of what they were planning settle over her. Going back to Red Hollow meant walking straight into the lion's den. Meant trusting that the law would work, that people would care, that justice was more than just a word people said but didn't mean. But what was the alternative? Stay hidden in the mountains, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when Tommy Barlow would come back to finish what he started? No, she was done hiding. When do we leave? She asked. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then at the fire, then back at her. 2 days. We need to prepare, make sure we have enough supplies to get us there and back. And we need to figure out exactly what we're going to say. I know what I'm going to say. The truth. The truth is a starting point, but how you tell it matters. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. This isn't just about getting justice, Clara. It's about changing how a whole town sees you. Right now, you're the kitchen girl who caused trouble. We need to make them see you as a person who was wronged. That takes more than just facts. It takes story. I'm not good at stories. Then we'll work on it together. He stood, moving to add wood to the fire. For now, get some sleep. Tomorrow we start planning. Day after that, we ride. Clara lay down on the cot. Caleb would sleep on the floor, he'd already insisted, and stared at the ceiling. Through the broken window she could see stars, cold and distant and indifferent to human struggles. 2 days until they rode back into the teeth of everything she'd fled. 2 days to prepare for a confrontation that could end with justice or disaster. 2 days to figure out how to stand up and be seen when she'd spent 4 years perfecting invisibility. Clara closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, but it was a long time coming. Those 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and second-guessing. Caleb worked on strategy while Clara tried to find the words to tell her story in a way that wouldn't make her sound like she was asking for pity. She didn't want pity. She wanted accountability. On the morning of the 3rd day, they packed light. Just enough food for the journey, water, ammunition for the rifle, and the few pieces of evidence they'd managed to salvage. A piece of charred timber from the cabin with kerosene residue still visible. The metal buckle from Clara's destroyed trunk, melted but recognizable. You ready? Caleb asked as they saddled the horses in the gray pre-dawn light. Clara's hand shook as she tightened Bertie's cinch. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's all being ready ever is. They rode out as the sun broke over the mountains, retracing the path Clara had taken 2 months earlier. The landscape looked different now. She understood it better, could read the signs Caleb had taught her. But it also felt foreign, like she was a different person than the one who'd fled Red Hollow in fear. Maybe she was. The ride took 2 days, camping one night in a shallow cave Caleb knew. They didn't talk much. Clara spent the time rehearsing what she'd say, imagining how people would react, trying to prepare for every possible outcome. By the time Red Hollow came into view on the 2nd afternoon, her stomach was tied in knots. The town looked exactly as she'd left it. Small, ordinary, people going about their lives without any idea that 6 of their own had burned down a man's home. Clara felt a surge of bitter anger at the normalcy of it all. We go to the sheriff first, Caleb said as they rode down Main Street. Get it on record before anyone can warn them. People stopped to stare. Clara saw recognition flicker across faces. Mrs. Patterson from the dry goods store, the banker's wife, 2 men from the lumber mill. Their expressions ranged from surprise to confusion to something that might have been shame. Let them stare. Clara kept her head up. The sheriff's office sat at the far end of Main, a small building with barred windows and a bored-looking deputy lounging in front. He straightened when he saw them approaching. Help you folks? We're here to see Sheriff Morrison, Caleb said, dismounting. It's urgent. The deputy's eyes flicked to Clara, lingering on her face. She'd gained weight since leaving, healthy weight, muscle, and strength, and her clothes were rough from mountain living. She looked nothing like the invisible kitchen girl who'd scrubbed dishes in silence. What's this about? Arson, destruction of property. We need to file a formal complaint. That got the deputy's attention. He disappeared inside, returning a moment later with Sheriff John Morrison, a thick man in his 50s with a handlebar mustache and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. "Mr. Ward," Morrison said, clearly recognizing Caleb, "didn't expect to see you in town. What's this about arson?" "My cabin was burned down 6 days ago, deliberately. I have evidence and witnesses." Morrison's expression shifted. "That's serious. Come inside, both of you." The office was cramped and smelled like old coffee and tobacco. Morrison gestured them to chairs while he settled behind a scarred desk piled with paperwork. "Start from the beginning." Caleb laid out the facts methodically. The smoke they'd seen, the tracks around the cabin, coming back to find 6 men ransacking the property, watching from the ridge as they burned it down. Morrison listened, taking notes. When Caleb finished, the sheriff turned to Clara. "Miss Boone, you were there?" "Yes, sir." "And you recognized the men?" Clara took a breath, steadying herself. "Tommy Barlow, Pete and Dale Crenshaw, Virgil Hayes, and 2 others I didn't know by name." Morrison's pen stopped moving. He looked up slowly. "Those are serious accusations. It's what happened." "You're certain it was them? From a distance, in winter light, could be hard to tell." "I'm certain." Claire's voice was firm. "I know what Tommy Barlow looks like. I know how he moves. It was him." The sheriff set down his pen and leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "You understand this puts me in a difficult position. Tommy's father is a respected businessman. The Crenshaws work for one of the biggest ranches in the county. I can't just go arresting people based on one person's word." "2 people," Caleb corrected. "I saw them too." "From how far away?" "Far enough to be safe. Close enough to be sure." Morrison sighed. "Even so, it's your word against theirs. And no offense, but you're an outsider, and she's—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "She's what?" Caleb's voice went cold. "She's the girl they attacked in an alley 2 months ago? The girl they've been harassing since she set foot in this town? The girl who had every reason to leave and is brave enough to come back and face them? I'm just saying how a jury would see it." "Then make them see it different." Caleb stood, placing the charred timber on Morrison's desk. "This is from my cabin. You can still smell the kerosene. I've got the ruins up there waiting for you to inspect. I've got tracks in the snow that'll match their horses. I've got a timeline that puts them at my property exactly when the fire started." Morrison looked at the evidence without touching it. "I'll need to verify all of this." "Fine. Come up to the cabin tomorrow. See for yourself. But tonight, I want you to question those men. Get their stories on record before they have time to coordinate. I can't just haul them in without cause. You have cause. You have a formal complaint, evidence, and 2 witnesses." Caleb planted his hands on the desk, leaning in. "What you don't have is an excuse to ignore this. So do your job, Sheriff, or I'll start asking why you won't." The threat hung in the air. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "Fine. I'll bring them in for questioning tonight, separately, see what they have to say." He looked at Clara. "You'll need to be available to give a full statement. Answer questions. Face them if it comes to that." Clara's heart hammered, but she met his eyes. "I'll do whatever's necessary." "All right then." Morrison stood, clearly dismissing them. "Where can I find you?" "The boarding house on 3rd, Caleb said. "We'll be there." They left the office and walked their horses down the street. Clara could feel eyes on them from every direction. News traveled fast in small towns, and half of Red Hollow probably knew they were here by now. "You did good in there," Caleb said quietly. "I barely said anything." "You said enough. And you didn't flinch." He glanced at her. "Morrison's cautious, but he's not corrupt. If we give him enough evidence, he'll act. And if we don't, then we make enough noise that he has to." They reached the boarding house, the same one where Caleb had stayed before. The owner, a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Kowalski, looked them over with obvious disapproval. "2 rooms, Caleb said, putting money on the counter. Mrs. Kowalski's eyes narrowed. "You 2 together?" "We're colleagues. 2 rooms, separate floors if you have them." She took the money with a sniff and handed over keys. "Breakfast is at 7. Don't be late." Clara's room was small and cold, but it had a real bed and walls that didn't let in wind. After 2 months in the mountains, it felt almost luxurious. She sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted, and let herself feel the weight of what they'd just done. They'd filed the complaint, set things in motion. There was no going back now. A knock on the door made her jump. "It's me," Caleb's voice. Clara opened the door to find him holding 2 plates of food. "Figured you wouldn't want to eat downstairs. Too many eyes." "Thank you." She took one of the plates, roast chicken, potatoes, bread. Real food, the kind she hadn't eaten in months. "Where'd you get this?" "Restaurant across the street. Owner owes me a favor." He leaned against the doorframe but didn't come in. "How are you holding up?" "I'm scared." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." "That's not comforting." "Wasn't meant to be." "Comfort makes you soft." But his expression gentled. "You're doing the right thing, Clara. Whatever happens, remember that." What if they get away with it? What if Morrison decides it's too much trouble and just drops the whole thing? Then we escalate. We write to the territorial governor. We talk to newspapers in Cheyenne. We make enough noise that someone has to listen. Caleb straightened. "But I don't think it'll come to that. Morrison saw the evidence. He knows something happened. He just needs to build a case strong enough to stick." Clara nodded, wanting to believe him. "What do we do now?" "We eat, we rest. Tomorrow, we'll see what Morrison turns up." He started to leave, then paused. "Lock your door tonight, and keep that knife close." "You think they'd try something?" "I think cornered animals get dangerous. Better to be prepared." After he left, Clara ate her dinner and tried to settle her nerves. Outside her window, she could see Main Street, people coming and going, living their ordinary lives. Somewhere out there, Tommy Barlow and his friends were probably getting word that the sheriff wanted to talk to them, probably scrambling to align their stories. Let them scramble. Clara was done making their lives easier. She slept fitfully, waking at every sound. But morning came without incident, and she dressed carefully in her best clothes, the Sunday dress she'd packed, clean and mended. If she was going to face this town, she'd do it looking like someone who deserved to be heard. Caleb met her downstairs, looking tired but determined. They ate breakfast in silence, while Mrs. Kowalski and the other guests pretended not to stare. At 9 o'clock, a deputy arrived with a message. Sheriff Morrison wanted to see them. They found him at his office, looking like he hadn't slept. Papers covered his desk, and there was a fresh pot of coffee brewing. "Sit," he said without preamble. "We need to talk." Clara's stomach dropped. "What happened? I brought in all 6 men last night, questioned them separately like you asked." Morrison rubbed his face. "Their stories match perfectly. Too perfectly. They claim they were all together at the Broken Creek Ranch 6 days ago playing cards. Say they never left. Have witnesses to prove it." "They're lying," Clara said. "Probably. But their witnesses will swear under oath that they're telling the truth. Ranch owner, his wife, 2 other hands. All respectable people with no reason to lie." Caleb leaned forward. "Except loyalty. The Crenshaws work there. The owner's not going to admit his employees were off burning down cabins." "That's my thought too, but it's still their word against yours, and they outnumber you." Morrison pulled out a map. "However, I did some checking, talked to folks around town. Seems several people saw 6 riders heading north the morning of the fire. Couldn't identify them specifically, but the timing matches." "That's something," Caleb said. "It's not enough. Not to arrest them. But it's enough to keep investigating." Morrison looked at Clara. "I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Why they targeted you, what happened in that alley, why you left town, all of it." So Clara told her story. Not the sanitized version she'd been rehearsing, but the raw truth. The poverty, the invisibility, the night Tommy Barlow and his friends cornered her. Caleb stepping in. Walter Mackenzie firing her. The choice to leave. Morrison listened without interrupting, taking notes. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That alley incident. Were there any other witnesses besides Mr. Ward?" "I don't know. Maybe. It was late, but the saloon was open. I'll ask around." Morrison stood. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm riding up to your cabin today to see the damage for myself. While I'm gone, Deputy Carson will keep an eye on things here. You 2 stay in town, stay visible, don't do anything that could be twisted against you. Understood?" "We're not going anywhere," Caleb said. After Morrison left, Clara and Caleb walked back to the boarding house. The streets felt hostile now, every glance a potential threat. But Clara kept her head up, refusing to shrink. They spent the day in the boarding house parlor, where other guests could see them, where they had witnesses to their whereabouts. It felt like waiting for a verdict, time stretching and contracting unpredictably. Around 3 o'clock, the door burst open and Margot from the saloon rushed in, spotted Clara, and let out a cry. "Sweet mercy, it is you. I heard you were back, but I couldn't believe it." She crossed the room and pulled Clara into a fierce hug. "Girl, where have you been? We all thought you'd frozen to death somewhere." Clara hugged back, surprised by how much she'd missed the older woman's rough kindness. "I've been up in the mountains, with Caleb. He gave me work." Margot pulled back, studying her. "You look different, healthier, stronger." Her eyes narrowed. "Is he treating you right?" "Better than anyone in this town ever did." "Good, because if he wasn't, I'd have words." Margot glanced at Caleb, who nodded respectfully. Then she turned back to Clara. "I heard what happened. About the fire. About Tommy Barlow. Everyone's talking." "What are they saying?" Depends who you ask. Some folks think you're making trouble. Others think it's about time someone stood up to those boys." Margot's expression hardened. "I never believed their story about you attacking Tommy. I told Morrison as much when he came asking questions this morning." Clara's breath caught. "You're willing to testify? To what I know? Yes. I was in the kitchen that night. I heard the commotion in the alley. By the time I got outside, Mr. Ward here was already handling things. But I saw enough. Saw Tommy's friend slinking away. Saw your face after." She squeezed Clara's hand. "You're not alone in this. There's folks who know the truth." After Margot left, promising to talk to other potential witnesses, Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Maybe this wasn't as hopeless as she'd feared. Maybe there were people in Red Hollow who'd been waiting for someone to speak up. Morrison returned at sunset, his horse lathered and his expression grim. He found them in the parlor and jerked his head toward the door. "We need to talk. Private." They followed him to his office. Once inside, he pulled out a bottle of whiskey and poured 3 glasses. "I saw your cabin, or what's left of it." He pushed glasses toward them. No question it was deliberate. Burn pattern, kerosene residue, the way both structures caught at once. Someone wanted that place destroyed. "So you believe us," Caleb said. "I believe the evidence. Problem is, I still can't prove who did it. The tracks you mentioned were mostly covered by new snow. I found some, matched them to standard horseshoes. Could be anyone's animals." Morrison took a drink. "But I talked to more people in town. Got 3 witnesses who saw 6 riders heading north that morning. Got 2 more who saw the same riders coming back late that night, looking pleased with themselves." "Can they identify them?" "One can. Old man named Porter, who was out hunting, says he recognized Tommy Barlow's horse, distinctive white blaze on its face. That's not proof Tommy was riding it, but it's something." Clara leaned forward. "What do we need? What would make this stick?" Morrison sighed. "Ideally, a confession, or someone willing to turn on the others. Barring that, we need enough circumstantial evidence to create reasonable doubt about their alibi." He looked between them. "I'm building a case. It's slow, but it's solid. The question is whether you're willing to see it through. This could take weeks, maybe months, and it's going to get ugly." "How ugly?" Clara asked. "Tommy's father is already talking about filing countercharges. Says you're slandering his son, damaging his reputation. Says this is revenge for being fired from the saloon." Morrison's expression was sympathetic. "They're going to drag your name through the mud, Clara. Make you out to be vindictive, unstable, a liar. Can you handle that?" Clara thought about the kitchen girl she'd been. Quiet, invisible, apologetic. Then she thought about who she'd become, someone who could split wood, track animals, survive in wilderness, someone who'd chosen to come back and face her fears instead of running forever. "I can handle it." "You're sure?" "Because once this gets to court, if it gets to court, there's no taking it back. Your life becomes public record. My life was already public record. People talked about me for 4 years without knowing anything true." Clara straightened her shoulders. "At least this time they'll hear the actual story." Morrison nodded slowly. "All right then. Here's what happens next. I'm formally charging all 6 men with arson and destruction of property. Their arraignment is in 3 days. They'll plead not guilty, post bail, go home. But it puts them on notice, and it gives us time to build our case." "Will they come after us?" Clara asked. "Try to intimidate us into dropping charges?" They might try. That's why I'm assigning Deputy Carson to keep watch. And I'm making it very clear to all involved that any harassment, any threats, any contact at all with either of you will result in additional charges. Morrison's voice went hard. I don't like bullies. Never have. These boys have been getting away with too much for too long. Time someone reminded them there are consequences. They left the office as night fell over Red Hollow. The temperature had dropped and Clara pulled her coat tighter. Caleb walked close, his hand near the rifle he now carried openly. You okay? He asked quietly. I don't know. Ask me when this is over. Fair enough. They were halfway back to the boarding house when a figure stepped out of the shadows ahead. Clara's hand went to her knife, but Caleb touched her arm. Wait. The figure moved into the lamplight. It was a woman, young, maybe Clara's age, with worn clothes and frightened eyes. Miss Boone? Her voice trembled. I heard you were back. I need to talk to you. Who are you? My name's Sarah Hendricks. I work at the hotel. She glanced around nervously. I can't be seen talking to you, but I had to tell someone. Tell us what? Clara moved closer. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. Tommy Barlow and Pete Crenshaw. They came to the hotel the night they got back from wherever they went. They were drunk, laughing about burning some mountain man's cabin. I heard them talking. I can testify. Clara's heart leaped. You'd be willing to do that? Publicly? I'm scared. Tommy's mean when he drinks, but what they did... Sarah's voice shook. My brother died in a fire. I can't just let this go. It's not right. Caleb stepped forward. Tell Sheriff Morrison what you told us. As soon as possible, he'll protect you. Will he? Because Tommy's father owns half this town. Morrison's a good man, and the more people who come forward, the harder it gets for the Barlows to intimidate everyone. Clara took Sarah's hand. You're brave for doing this. Braver than you know. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. Okay, I'll go tomorrow. But if something happens to me... Nothing will happen, Caleb said firmly. We'll make sure of it. Sarah disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Clara and Caleb standing in the cold. This changes things, Caleb said. She's risking everything. So are you. That's what courage looks like. He started walking again. Come on, let's get inside before someone else decides to have a dramatic conversation in the street. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Sarah Hendricks, about Margot, about Old Man Porter. People stepping forward, risking retaliation, choosing truth over safety. She'd spent 4 years believing she was alone in Red Hollow, that no one cared what happened to the invisible kitchen girl. She'd been wrong. The next morning, Sarah Hendricks gave her statement to Sheriff Morrison. By noon, the whole town knew. By evening, 2 more witnesses had come forward. Both saloon employees who'd seen Tommy and his friends that night heard them bragging. The case Morrison was building went from circumstantial to concrete. Tommy Barlow's father showed up at the sheriff's office, red-faced and furious, threatening lawsuits and political consequences. Morrison told him to get out. The Crenshaw brothers' employer came next, trying to vouch for his employees. Morrison told him to wait for the trial. And through it all, Clara stayed visible. She walked through town with Caleb at her side. She looked people in the eye. She refused to shrink. On the 3rd day, the arraignment happened. Clara sat in the courthouse, a cramped room above the general store, and watched as Tommy Barlow, Pete and Dale Crenshaw, Virgil Hayes, and the 2 others were led in. They saw her immediately. Tommy's eyes locked onto hers, full of hate and promised violence. Clara stared back, refusing to look away. She'd spent too many years being afraid of men like him. Not anymore. The judge, an old man named Carmichael, who'd been presiding over Red Hollow's legal matters for 30 years, read the charges in a dry voice. Arson, destruction of property, conspiracy. Each defendant pleaded not guilty. Bail was set at $500 each, a fortune for most people, pocket change for the Barlows. They'd be out by nightfall, but they'd also been formally charged. Their names were in the record, and the trial date was set for 3 weeks out. As they left the courthouse, Tommy brushed past Clara, close enough to whisper, "You're going to regret this." Caleb was there instantly, putting himself between them. "Is that a threat, Barlow?" "Just a prediction." Tommy smiled, ugly and certain. "You can't hide behind the law forever." "Don't need forever. just long enough to see you convicted. Morrison's deputy intervened before it could escalate, but the message was clear. Tommy and his friends weren't going to go quietly. That night, someone threw a rock through Clara's boarding house window. The note wrapped around it read, "Leave town or burn with it." Morrison came immediately, collected the evidence, assigned a deputy to watch the building. But Clara knew this was just the beginning. The trial was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks of intimidation, threats, pressure. 3 weeks of proving she wouldn't break. She lay in bed that night, listening to footsteps in the hall, jumping at every sound, and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. If fighting back was worth the cost, if justice was worth her life. Then she thought about the cabin burning, about 2 months of peace and purpose reduced to ash because men like Tommy Barlow couldn't stand the idea of being told no, about 4 years of invisibility that had protected her from nothing. And she knew, bone deep and certain, that this was the only choice she could live with. Tomorrow she'd wake up. She'd walk through town with her head up. She'd face whatever came with the same stubborn determination that had gotten her through winter in the mountains. She'd survive this too. And when it was over, when the verdict came and justice was served or denied, Clara Boone would still be standing. Because that's what she did now. She survived. And she fought back. The 3 weeks before trial crawled by like wounded animals, slow, painful, leaving blood in their wake. Clara stopped counting the threats. Notes shoved under her door, whispers that followed her down the street. Twice, someone tried to set fire to the boarding house stables, but Deputy Carson caught them before real damage was done. The culprits were never identified, though everyone knew who'd sent them. But something else was happening too, something Tommy Barlow and his father hadn't counted on. Every act of intimidation brought more people to Clara's side. The restaurant owner who'd given Caleb food started offering them meals for free. Mrs. Patterson from the dry goods store publicly stated she'd seen the men riding north that morning. A ranch hand from a competing outfit came forward to say the Broken Creek alibi was impossible. He'd seen their bunkhouse empty that day. Red Hollow was choosing sides, and the lines weren't falling where the Barlows expected. The morning of the trial, Clara woke before dawn with her stomach in knots. She dressed carefully in the same Sunday dress, pinned her hair back, and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. The face looking back was different from the one that had left Red Hollow 3 months ago. Harder, clearer. Someone who'd learned that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant deciding what you'd accept and what you'd fight. Caleb met her downstairs. He'd cleaned up as much as mountain living allowed. Fresh shirt, beard trimmed, boots brushed free of mud. But there was no hiding what he was. A man who lived outside society's rules, who'd chosen wilderness over civilization, who'd stepped into an alley to defend a stranger and upended his whole life doing it. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 4 years, just didn't know it." They walked to the courthouse together. The street was already crowded. Seemed like half the town had turned out to watch. Clara could feel eyes on her, hear the whispers. Some sympathetic, some hostile, most just curious, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The courtroom was packed. Judge Carmichael sat at the front, looking sour and impatient. The prosecutor, a thin man named Dawson, who'd traveled from Cheyenne, shuffled papers at one table. At the other sat Tommy Barlow and his 5 co-defendants, flanked by 2 expensive lawyers their families had hired. Clara took her seat in the front row, Caleb beside her. Across the aisle, she could see Tommy's father, red-faced and glowering, the Crenshaw brothers' employer, Virgil Hayes's drinking buddies, all the people who'd rather this went away quietly, but quiet had never protected anyone. Clara had learned that lesson the hard way. Judge Carmichael banged his gavel. "Court is in session. Let's get this over with. Mr. Dawson, present your case." Dawson stood, adjusting his spectacles. He wasn't flashy, but he was thorough. He walked the jury through the timeline methodically, Clara's departure from Red Hollow, the months she'd spent at Caleb's cabin, the evidence of the fire. He called witness after witness. Old Man Porter, who identified Tommy's horse. Sarah Hendricks, whose voice shook but held firm as she recounted what she'd heard. The saloon workers who'd seen the men celebrating their hunting trip. Then he called Caleb to the stand. Caleb took the oath and sat, completely at ease despite being the center of attention. The defense lawyer, a slick man named Hawthorne, practically licked his lips. "Mr. Ward," Hawthorne began, You live alone in the mountains, is that correct? Yes. Isolated? No neighbors? No oversight? That's how I prefer it. And when you brought Miss Boone to your cabin, was there anyone else present? Any chaperone? Any witness to ensure propriety? Caleb's expression didn't change. I built her separate quarters, set clear boundaries, treated her with respect. So you say. But we have only your word for that, don't we? Hawthorne smiled. Couldn't it be argued that Miss Boone's accusations stem from personal entanglement? Perhaps a relationship that soured? A woman scorned seeking revenge? Dawson objected immediately. Relevance, Your Honor. Miss Boone's personal life has nothing to do with arson. It has everything to do with motivation, Hawthorne countered. If the witness and the alleged victim have a romantic relationship, it calls into question their credibility. Judge Carmichael looked annoyed. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Hawthorne. Hawthorne turned back to Caleb. So, Mr. Ward, are you and Miss Boone romantically involved? No? But you care for her. You've provided for her, protected her. I care about doing what's right. She needed help. I offered it.
How noble. And when these 6 young men allegedly burned your cabin, you just happened to be watching from a convenient distance? We saw smoke, investigated carefully, watched them destroy my property. Or perhaps you saw some hunter's campfire and invented a story to justify Miss Boone's vendetta against men who rejected her advances.
Caleb's jaw tightened, the first crack in his composure. Those men cornered her in an alley, intended to hurt her. I stopped them. That's not rejection. That's assault. Alleged assault, for which no charges were ever filed. Hawthorne's smile widened. Convenient how everything is alleged and unprovable, isn't it? The fire's real. The destroyed cabin's real. The kerosene residue is real. But the identity of the arsonist is not. You claim to have seen my clients from a distance, in winter conditions, at dusk. That's not exactly reliable identification. I know what I saw. Do you? Or do you know what Miss Boone wanted you to see? Dawson objected again, and the lawyers argued while Clara sat there, feeling her credibility being systematically shredded. This was the ugly part Morrison had warned about, the part where they made her look vindictive, Caleb look gullible, and the truth look like elaborate revenge. But then Caleb said something that cut through all the legal posturing.
I've lived in these mountains for 7 years. In that time, I've had maybe 3 visitors total. People don't just wander up to my cabin by accident. It's remote, hidden. You'd have to know it was there to find it. He leaned forward. Those 6 men knew where to look because they'd scouted it earlier, because they'd decided to burn me out for the crime of helping someone they considered beneath them. That's not alleged. That's fact. Hawthorne tried to recover, but the damage was done. The jury had seen his certainty, heard the logic. They might still doubt, but they were listening. After Caleb, Dawson called Clara to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like moving through water, everything slow and resistant. Clara took the oath with a voice that only shook a little, then sat facing the courtroom. Facing Tommy Barlow, who stared at her with undisguised hatred, Dawson started gentle. Miss Boone, tell us how you came to be in Red Hollow. So Clara told her story again. But this time, with the whole town watching, she didn't hold back. She talked about the poverty that had chased her and her mother from town to town, about arriving in Red Hollow with nothing and being given less, about 4 years of being invisible, being nothing, being the girl nobody saw unless they needed someone to blame. And on the night of January 15th, what happened? Clara described the alley, the 6 men, the fear. Tommy's fist connecting with her face, the way they discussed what to do with her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person. Then what happened? Caleb Ward stepped in, talked them down without throwing a punch, gave me a chance to get away. Clara's voice steadied. That's when it started. Not the attack. That was just them being who they'd always been. But the consequences. That's what they couldn't forgive. What consequences? Being told no, being stopped, being made to look weak in front of each other. Clara looked directly at Tommy. Men like that don't accept limits. They'd rather burn down the world than admit they were wrong. Hawthorne was on his feet immediately. Objection! The witness is speculating about my client's motivations. I'm stating what I know, Clara interrupted, surprising herself.
I know what Tommy Barlow said in that alley. I know the promises he made. And I know he kept them when he burned down the only safe place I'd found in 4 years. Judge Carmichael banged his gavel. Miss Boone, you'll answer the questions asked and nothing more. Yes, Your Honor. But Clara didn't look away from Tommy. Let him see she wasn't afraid anymore. When Hawthorne's turn came for cross-examination, he tried the same tactics, implying impropriety, questioning her character, suggesting she was making everything up for attention or money or revenge. Isn't it true, Miss Boone, that you were fired from your position at Mackenzie's Saloon for theft? I was let go because Walter Mackenzie didn't want trouble, and he considered me trouble the moment I got attacked. That's not what I asked. Were you or were you not accused of stealing kitchen scraps? I had permission to take scraps headed for the pigs. Tommy Barlow decided to call it theft. There's a difference. Is there? Or are you simply someone who takes what isn't yours and then cries victim when caught? Clara felt anger flare but kept her voice level. If I wanted to take something that wasn't mine, I'd have aimed higher than potato peels. A few people in the gallery laughed. Hawthorne's face reddened. You're quite bold for someone with your background, quite willing to make accusations against respectable men. I'm willing to tell the truth. If that makes me bold, fine. The truth. How convenient that your truth paints you as innocent and my clients as monsters. I didn't paint them as anything. They did that themselves when they decided burning down a cabin was appropriate revenge for being told to leave a woman alone. Hawthorne tried several more angles, but Clara didn't break. She'd survived too much to crumble under questions from a lawyer who'd probably never gone hungry, never been afraid, never had to choose between pride and survival. When she finally stepped down, her legs were shaking, but she'd held her ground. The defense called their witnesses next. The ranch owner swearing the Crenshaws had been with him all day. Tommy's father testifying to his son's good character. Friends who swore they'd all been playing cards, each one sounding rehearsed, each story a little too perfect. Then Hawthorne called Tommy Barlow himself. Tommy took the stand looking confident, almost bored. He denied everything with casual certainty, claimed he'd never been to Caleb's cabin, never threatened Clara, never touched her in that alley. According to him, Clara had attacked him unprovoked, and he'd simply defended himself. I barely even remember her, he said with a shrug. Just some kitchen girl who caused trouble. Why would I care enough to track her down months later? It was a good question, and it might have worked if Dawson hadn't been ready. If you barely remember Miss Boone, Dawson said during cross-examination, why did you tell Sarah Hendricks, and I quote, that fat bitch thought she could embarrass me. Bet she's not so proud now that her mountain man's cabin is ashes. Tommy's face went blank. I never said that. Miss Hendricks testified under oath that you did? Are you calling her a liar? She must have misheard. Misheard those specific words? That specific sentiment? Dawson walked closer. Or are you lying right now, Mr. Barlow? Objection! Hawthorne was on his feet. But the damage was done. The jury had seen Tommy's mask slip, seen the calculation behind his casual denials. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of testimony and cross-examination and legal maneuvering. 3 days of Clara sitting in that courtroom feeling like she was on trial as much as the men who'd burned Caleb's home. But slowly, methodically, Dawson built his case. The timeline that put the defendants near the cabin, the physical evidence, the witnesses who'd heard them bragging, the motive established by the alley incident. And through it all, Clara watched the jury. 12 men who would decide whether justice meant anything in Red Hollow or whether power and money could still buy immunity. On the third day, both sides gave their closing arguments. Hawthorne painted his clients as innocent young men railroaded by a vindictive woman and her mountain man protector. Dawson laid out the facts systematically, showing how every piece fit together into one inescapable conclusion. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Clara spent those hours in a small room adjacent to the courthouse, unable to eat, unable to sit still. Caleb sat in one corner, quiet and watchful. Margot had brought food nobody touched. Sheriff Morrison stopped by twice to check on them. However this goes, Morrison said, you did the right thing. You stood up. That counts. Clara wanted to believe him, but she also knew that moral victories didn't rebuild cabins or erase the fear that Tommy Barlow would walk free and come after them again. Finally, a knock on the door. Jury's back. The courtroom felt even more packed than before. Clara took her seat, Caleb's presence solid beside her. Across the aisle, Tommy and his co-defendants tried to look confident, but she could see the tension in their shoulders. Judge Carmichael entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged rancher Clara vaguely recognized, stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of arson, how do you find the defendants?" The foreman's voice carried clearly through the silent room. "Guilty." Clara's breath left her in a rush. Guilty. They'd said guilty. "On the charge of destruction of property?" Guilty. "On the charge of conspiracy?" Guilty. All around them, the courtroom erupted. Tommy's father was shouting. The defense lawyers were objecting, but Judge Carmichael's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! I will have order!" The room quieted, and Carmichael turned his attention to the defendants. "You 6 have been found guilty on all charges. Sentencing will be held tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Until then, you're remanded to custody. Bailiff, take them." As the bailiff moved forward, Tommy Barlow finally lost his composure. He lunged toward Clara, face twisted with rage. "You bitch! You lying—" Deputy Carson caught him before he got close, wrestling him back, but his voice carried over the chaos. "This isn't over! You hear me? It's not over!" "Yes, it is," Caleb said quietly, standing to block Clara from view. "It's over." They dragged Tommy out, still shouting. His friends went quieter, faces pale with shock. In 3 days, they'd gone from arrogant certainty to convicted criminals facing real consequences. Clara sat there, trembling, hardly able to process it. Guilty. The jury had believed her, had looked at all the evidence and chosen truth over power. Margot was beside her suddenly, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You did it, girl. You actually did it." "We did it," Clara corrected, looking at the crowd of people who'd testified, who'd stood up, who'd chosen to be counted. "All of us." The next morning, Judge Carmichael handed down sentences that sent shockwaves through Red Hollow. 2 years in territorial prison for arson. Restitution to be paid to Caleb Ward for the value of his destroyed property and possessions. And a permanent restraining order keeping all 6 men away from both Clara and Caleb. Tommy Barlow's father stood in the courtroom and called it a travesty. The defense lawyers promised appeals, but the marshal was already there to transport the prisoners, and within hours they were gone. Red Hollow settled into an uneasy quiet after that. Some people thought the sentences too harsh. Others thought they weren't harsh enough. But everyone agreed on one thing: Clara Boone wasn't invisible anymore. She stayed in town for another week, helping Morrison with paperwork, giving final statements, making sure every detail was recorded properly. During that time, something unexpected happened. People started talking to her. Not at her, not about her. To her. The owner of the dry goods store offered her a job. A woman whose husband had died the previous winter asked if Clara would be willing to help her with heavy work around her property. Even Walter Mackenzie approached her awkwardly one afternoon, trying to apologize without actually admitting he'd been wrong. Clara listened politely and told him she'd think about his offer to come back to the saloon. She had no intention of accepting, but she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of an immediate no. On the 8th day, she and Caleb packed their horses and prepared to leave. A small crowd had gathered to see them off. Margot, Sarah Hendricks, Old Man Porter, Morrison, and a handful of others. "You come back and visit, you hear?" Margot said, hugging Clara tight. "Don't be a stranger." "I won't." Sarah stepped forward shyly. "Thank you for being brave enough to start this. It helped me find my own courage." Clara squeezed her hand. "You were already brave. You just needed a reason to show it." Morrison shook Caleb's hand, then Clara's. "If you need anything, you send word. And if those men get out early, I'll make sure you know about it." Appreciated. They rode out of Red Hollow in late morning, the sun warming their backs. Clara didn't look behind her this time. Didn't need to. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing. The ride back to the mountains took 3 days, slower than necessary because they weren't fleeing, just traveling. They camped under stars, cooked over open fires, talked about what came next. "The line shack won't work long term," Caleb said one night. "We'll need to rebuild. Proper cabin this time. Maybe bigger." "Bigger?" He poked at the fire, not quite meeting her eyes. "Been thinking. About what you said in town, about helping people. There's others like you out there, people who need a place to go when everything else fails. Clara understood what he was suggesting. You want to turn the cabin into a refuge. Seems wasteful to keep all that space to myself when it could do some good. He glanced at her. But only if you're interested. It'd be more work, more people, less quiet. I've had enough quiet to last a lifetime. Clara smiled. I think it's a good idea. We help people the way you helped me. Give them a chance to find their strength. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. They reached the line shack to find it exactly as they'd left it. Small, drafty, barely adequate. But spring was coming. They could already see it in the way the snow was starting to melt, the way birds were returning, the way the air felt different. Over the next weeks, they began planning. Caleb sketched designs for a larger cabin with multiple rooms. Clara inventoried what supplies they'd need. They talked about how to spread the word, quietly, carefully, that there was a place in the mountains for people who needed escape. The first person who found them arrived in early May. A young woman named Anna, bruised and terrified, who'd heard from someone in Elk Ridge that there was a mountain man who helped people, no questions asked. Clara saw herself in Anna's face, that same desperate hope mixed with fear. You're safe here, Clara told her. We'll help you figure out what comes next. Anna stayed for 3 months, helping them build the new cabin, learning to survive, finding her strength. Then she moved on to Denver with enough money for a fresh start and skills to make it work. Others followed. Some stayed weeks, some stayed months. A few decided mountain living suited them and built their own cabins nearby, creating a small community of people who'd chosen the hard freedom of wilderness over the comfortable cage of civilization. Clara learned that helping others heal helped her heal too. Every person who arrived broken and left whole proved that worth wasn't something society granted. It was something you claimed for yourself. 2 years after the trial, on a crisp autumn morning, Clara stood on the porch of the new cabin and watched the sun rise over the mountains. The structure behind her was solid and spacious. 6 rooms, a proper kitchen, a large common area where people gathered in the evenings. Behind her, she could hear Caleb teaching their newest arrival how to split kindling. Somewhere in the distance, Anna's laugh carried on the wind. She'd come back to visit, bringing news that she was married now, happy, building a life she'd never imagined possible. Clara had changed too. Her body was strong from work. Her hands were scarred but capable. Her face had lines that came from smiling more than frowning. She wasn't the invisible kitchen girl anymore. Wasn't even the frightened woman who'd ridden away from Red Hollow 3 years ago. She was someone who mattered. Not because society said so, but because she'd decided to. Caleb joined her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He passed her one without speaking. They'd developed a comfortable rhythm over the years, knowing when to talk and when silence was enough. Thinking about Red Hollow? He asked eventually. No, thinking about here, about how strange it is that the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing. You made it the best thing. Could have gone different. Could have. Didn't. Clara took a sip of coffee. You ever regret it? Stepping into that alley? Everything that came after? Caleb considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary, that men like Tommy Barlow exist, that you had to go through any of it. He looked at her. But I don't regret the choice, and I don't regret where it brought us. Where's that? Here, building something that matters, helping people who need it, making a difference. He smiled slightly. Sarah would have liked this. What we're doing here? She always said the point of surviving was to help others do the same. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife in months. Clara took it as the gift it was. Trust, memory, the acknowledgement that healing didn't mean forgetting. I think she'd be proud of you. I think she'd be proud of you too, for fighting back, for not letting them win. They stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching the forest wake up. In the cabin behind them, life continued, people healing, learning, finding their way. It wasn't perfect. Some days were hard. Some people left worse than they arrived, but most found something here they couldn't find anywhere else. Hope, purpose, the radical idea that their lives had value regardless of what the world said. A few weeks later, Clara made a trip back to Red Hollow. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She rode in alone. Caleb had offered to come, but she'd declined. This was something she needed to do herself. The town looked smaller than she remembered. The buildings the same, the people familiar, but everything felt diminished somehow, like she'd grown past it. She visited Morrison first, who was pleased to see her, and reported that the 6 prisoners were serving their sentences without incident. Then Margot, who insisted on feeding her and catching her up on all the town gossip. Finally, she stopped at the cemetery. Her mother's grave sat in the corner, a simple marker Clara had never been able to afford to replace. She knelt beside it now, pulling weeds, arranging the wildflowers she'd brought from the mountains. "I wish you could see me now," Clara said quietly. "I think you'd be surprised. I'm not the girl you knew. I'm stronger, braver. I found a place where I belong." The wind moved through the cemetery, rustling leaves. Clara stayed a while longer, talking to her mother, telling her about the cabin, about the people they were helping, about building a life from ashes. When she finally stood to leave, she felt lighter. The past didn't own her anymore. She'd made peace with it. Walking back through town, Clara ran into Sarah Hendricks. The younger woman's face lit up. "Clara, I heard you were back. How long are you staying?" "Just today. Have to get back to the mountains before dark." "The refuge is really working? People are finding you?" "They are. More than we expected." Clara smiled. "You should come visit sometime. See what you helped make possible." "I will. I really will." Sarah hesitated, then said, "I heard Tommy Barlow's getting out in 6 months, early for good behavior." Clara felt a flicker of the old fear, then let it go. "Thanks for telling me. We'll be ready if he causes trouble, but I don't think he will. Men like him are only brave when they think they'll get away with it. He knows better now." She believed that. The trial had taught Tommy that actions had consequences, that society would push back if pushed hard enough. It might not change him fundamentally, but it would make him think twice. And if he did come looking for revenge, well, Clara wasn't the frightened kitchen girl anymore. She knew how to defend herself now, how to fight, how to survive. She rode back to the mountains as the sun set, feeling the pull of home. Not the house she'd grown up in, not Red Hollow, not any place defined by geography. Home was the cabin in the clearing, was Caleb's steady presence, was the people who arrived broken and left whole, was the life she'd built from nothing but determination and choice. When she crested the final ridge and saw the cabin lights glowing in the valley below, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Peace, belonging, the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She rode down the mountain, and as she approached, the door opened. Caleb stood there, silhouetted against the warm light, waiting for her. "Welcome home," he said. And it was. Years passed. The refuge grew. Clara and Caleb became known throughout the territory as people who helped when help was needed. They never advertised, never sought recognition, but word spread anyway, the way important things do. People arrived with all kinds of pain. Abuse survivors, the destitute, those fleeing violence or injustice. Some came from nearby towns, others traveled for weeks to reach the mountains. Each one found the same thing Clara had found: respect, work, dignity, and the chance to rebuild. Clara discovered she was good at this, at seeing past people's brokenness to their potential, at knowing when to push and when to give space, at helping others find the strength she'd had to discover for herself. Some of those who passed through went on to start their own refuges in different places. Others settled nearby, creating a loose community of people bound by shared experience rather than blood. The mountains that had once represented isolation became a symbol of hope. On Clara's 30th birthday, Caleb surprised her with something he'd been working on for months, a sign carved from pine, beautifully detailed, that read, "Ward's Rest, all who need are welcome." "I thought about calling it Clara's place," he said, "but you'd probably hit me." Clara laughed. "You're right. But Ward's Rest implies it's yours." "It's ours, but I'm old-fashioned about names." He grew serious. "What we've built here, Clara, it matters. It's going to outlast both of us." I wanted to mark that. They hung the sign at the trail entrance where anyone climbing toward the cabin would see it. A promise, an invitation, a declaration that in these mountains, people mattered. Years later, when Clara was older and her hair had started to gray, she sometimes thought about that girl in the Red Hollow alley. The one who'd been cornered and afraid and certain the world had no place for her. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up, to accepting that invisibility was the price of safety. And she thought about the choice she'd made instead, to trust a stranger, to flee into wilderness, to stand up in a courtroom and demand to be seen. That choice had cost her. There were nights she still woke from nightmares about Tommy Barlow's fist, still felt the phantom pain of those first weeks in the mountains, still carried scars that would never fully fade, but it had also given her everything: purpose, home, the knowledge that she could survive anything because she already had. On quiet mornings, when she stood on the porch watching the sun paint the peaks in shades of gold and red, Clara sometimes marveled at the path her life had taken. How pain had led to strength, how running away had led to standing firm, how the worst thing that had ever happened to her had somehow transformed into the best thing. She'd learned that worth wasn't something others granted. It was something you claimed, defended, built with your own hands. That justice wasn't always guaranteed, but fighting for it mattered anyway. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing to act despite it. And perhaps most importantly, she'd learned that no one was truly invisible. People only appeared that way when others chose not to see them. Clara had spent 4 years being overlooked. She'd spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to. Caleb joined her on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in his hands like always. They'd grown old together, though neither would have described their relationship as traditional. Partners in purpose rather than romance. 2 damaged people who'd built something beautiful from their shared brokenness. "New arrival coming up the trail," he said, pointing to a small figure in the distance. "Looks young." Clara watched the person approach, seeing in their cautious movements the same fear she'd once carried. "I'll get a room ready. They'll need food, rest, maybe medical attention." "We'll handle it," Clara smiled. "We always do." Because that's what they'd built here. Not just a cabin or a refuge, but a living promise that survival was possible, that healing was real, that even people the world had given up on could find their way to worth. The figure drew closer, and Clara could make out more details now. A woman, probably not yet 20, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd seen too much. She climbed the trail slowly, stopping every few steps to look back like she expected pursuit. When she finally reached the cabin, Clara stepped forward with a gentle smile. "You're safe here. My name's Clara. Welcome towards rest." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think it was real. People said there was a place in the mountains where you could start over, but I thought it was just a story." "It's real, and you're here." Clara gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. We'll get you fed and settled. Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next. But tonight, you just rest." As she led the woman inside, Clara caught Caleb's eye. He nodded, understanding passing between them without words. This was why they did it. Why they kept the doors open despite the work, despite the risk, despite everything. Because once upon a time, Clara had been that frightened woman, and someone had chosen to help her. Now she was paying it forward, building a legacy not of wealth or power, but of second chances, creating a place where worth was recognized rather than earned, where dignity was the baseline rather than the reward. The girl who didn't matter had become the woman who ensured others did. And in the harsh silence of the mountains, where only strength and truth survived, Clara Boone had finally found what Red Hollow never gave her: a life where she mattered, and a purpose that changed everything.